Is going. I want to, for the record, I want to indicate that this is Sue Madden, an interviewer for the Oral History Project of the Newport Historical Society on the neighborhoods of Newport, and I'm in the home of Bernard Kusinitz, who has been kind enough to let me come into his home and ask him the following questions. The first one is about where you were born.
I was born in Newport. As a strict matter of fact, right around the corner from here on Bliss Road, which of course is one of the important streets of the city. And then outside of Broadway and the beach area, it's the connecting link between Newport and Middletown, the rest of the island.
So you were born at home, not
At
in the
home,
hospital.
At home.
Okay, and your parents were born where?
In Russia.
And when did they come to this country?
They came to this country to Connecticut. I'm trying to think of the town. Waterbury, Connecticut.
Mm-hmm.
And from there, they came here to Newport.
They were married when they left Russia?
Yes, yes. My sister, who was older than myself, was born in Russia. Came here as a little tyke. And my brother and myself were both born here in Newport.
Okay, and your brother is younger than you are then?
Older.
Older. Okay,
I'm the end of the line.
okay. And what was your father's occupation?
He was a small businessman. In Connecticut, he worked in a factory.
Uh-huh.
And here, like so many of the other people who came here, became a small businessman, which was the lifestyle of that era.
Did he always have the same business?
Yes, with variations. And
Morning.
Good morning.
Good morning. This is your wife's mother, right?
That's
Yeah.
correct.
Yes, how do you do?
This is Mrs. Madden,
Yeah.
and that's Mr. Madden over
Hello.
there. Yeah. We're discussing
Son-in-law.
Want to sit down for a few minutes? Go ahead. See, at that particular era, the men and women who came to this country were obviously not American educated, and most of them, when they came to this country, were not white-collar people,
Mm-hmm.
obviously coming from that type of background. So invariably, almost all of them of that particular generation ended up in small businessmen.
Mm-hmm.
Would you want to sit over there?
Did your mother work in the home exclusively?
She worked with my
Oh.
father. The home and the business were together. The business on the street floor, the home on the second and third floors.
Yeah, this was in this North End area
This north end.
of Newport?
Remember, this is the north end of the city. The north end is.
There is some poem that I heard once about the different areas of Newport. Did you ever hear that about the point and the...
Well, the point was, there is a section where the Point Hummers lived.
Yes.
We were the north enders living in the north end, and the other end of the city, which we looked upon with noses up, I suppose, was the so-called Fifth Ward,
Yeah.
which of course now is the Fourth Ward. But they were a world unto themselves down there. Very colorful, very unique. But Newport is one of them.
Yeah. Well, we're going to have a lot of questions later about the neighborhood, so it sounds like you know quite a bit about that. Did your parents share in the work inside the home as well as you mentioned in the business, or was there a division of labor in terms of?
It was primarily a division. My father almost exclusively in the business. My mother sort of split. She was mostly in the house, but she spelled him. He did a lot of charitable work in his time, and she would spell him in the business. It's the old mom and pop type of business.
Now, what about you and your brother and sister? Did you share in the store?
Each in our own way, I suppose, depending on the time. As my sister grew up, they were able to send her to business school, and she left Newport.
Uh-huh.
I think she went from Newport to New York, and that's to Washington, D.C., where she became a bureaucrat, you know. And
and now she's the one who's living in Florida now,
that
right?
is correct.
Yeah.
I remember, of course, the Depression hit, and no one's business was sufficient, I suppose. And my brother, a young teenager at the time, tried to supplement the family income by working part-time elsewhere.
Uh-huh.
He worked for a wholesaler for a while, then he worked in a tobacco shop downtown. That much I remember. After all, I was just a youngster myself.
So how many years difference was there between you and your brother?
3.
3 years. And then between you and your sister?
Let me see, about 5 or 6,
Uh-huh.
I guess. 6? Something
Yeah.
like that. We don't explore that too thoroughly.
Now, did you have jobs out also
No.
as a kid?
No. Well, I helped in the store. I did a lot of the stock work, helped keep the place clean, and delivered circulars to advertise the store in the
Yeah.
neighborhood. That's deliveries on foot, of course. And see, that was an era when the neighborhood store was a important element in the economic life of a town such as this. And this is, you got to remember, not that you don't have to remember, but it's sort of hard to understand now. My father's business was a grocery store, which he enlarged later to include automobile tires. After the Depression, went into liquors, in addition to the groceries.
Uh-huh.
But at that particular time, this was before the era of the chain store, in a town like this, and I can document this, I would say probably small food stores, there must have been anywhere from 150, 175 stores in the town, of which about 60 were owned by those of the Jewish faith,
Huh.
even, which is way out of proportion to the numbers, of
Sure.
course. As I say, and this is the generation I left that saw Newport through the Depression. It's this type of business that extended the credit and kept people alive until things got better. But then the chain store age emerged.
And about what year was that, do you think, that it had its influence? In,
Post-Depression, I guess.
Yeah.
The chain stores began during the Depression, I suppose. And the small stores could compete with the chain store. But what they couldn't compete with later on was the supermarket.
Yeah.
And now, of course, the supermarkets are having troubles too. The dinosaurs are eating the dinosaurs. You see, so nobody knows how that's going to develop yet. But in those days, every neighborhood had its store or stores. Well, you can figure out how many neighborhoods are there in town.
Yeah.
And at least at one time, well over 150 or more food stores.
You mentioned the economic importance of these smaller stores. What about that? Were there other important parts, like social or?
I'd have to give an ethnic answer to that.
All right.
See, you've got to remember that particular generation cut their roots from Europe.
Yes.
Now, the only people they have, root-wise, as themselves, and they're so-called Latsmen, but to use an Italian word, paisans,
Yeah.
which is a very colorful way of putting it. There were no fancy roads the way they're around now, no interstate connecting roads. The only way they had to entertain themselves was themselves. This is the era before radio, before television,
Cars were
before
not
stereo.
Yeah.
Cars were a decided luxury.
Yes.
And so the only people they had was themselves. They had to depend on themselves for their own entertainment. So there was a very strong camaraderie then among these people. Not only because they only had themselves, but in the case of a town like Newport, probably, say in the 20s, there may have been somewhere around 100 Jewish families in town. Of those, probably, directly, indirectly, you could link maybe 15 to one family. Using the word very loosely.
Yes.
Because, like my...
Well, but you don't mean genetically, you mean...
through marriage.
Oh, okay.
Like, my father's sister married a man who had 3 brothers, and between them that linked to another couple dozen families, you see, into family in the general sense of the word, in the loose sense of the word.
So when your parents came to Newport, other members of the family came
He had
also?
a brother here and a brother-in-law, and a lot of people from the hometown in Europe. And apparently, although in my research I've tried to find out why do they come to Newport, unfortunately the generations who are here, the second generation, third generation, never bothered to find out why did their fathers and grandfathers come to Newport in particular.
Mm-hmm.
It seems that once the trend starts, it snowballs. There's an uncle here, there's a brother here, there's a cousin here.
Some contact so that you
That's
would,
right.
you know.
So that you end up here with a large group. In fact, my father organized a social group at the time. This is in the 20s, called the Family Circle, in which people of this larger type family became members, and they were allowed to bring in one member each. Now, quite by accident, just a couple months ago, I ran across, while looking for something else in the Daily News of 1925, a little clipping in the paper. This group had an election of officers. Now, I had been under the impression, from the very few times that my father mentioned this thing, that this was a small, tiny little group. But lo and behold, reading right up, they had a banquet with approximately 100 people attending, with a guest speaker from New York.
Oh my gosh.
So it has to be a little bit larger than one was first originally, in context at the time, you see. And so this strikes the importance of this sort of thing. And of course, this is the forerunner of the more contemporary Cousins Club and Couples Club kind of thing.
Sure.
In fact, it's almost an amalgam of the two concepts. And it's very important.
Well, now, did you attend some of these meetings of
No. I only found this most of this out later on. After all, what does it take know when a whole bunch of people come to the
So
house?
was it just the adults then that would
Adults,
attend,
yes.
or just the men, or?
Well, I imagine at this time these men must have been, what, 20s and 30s and 40s. Because we're dealing with, now this is 1980-something. Go back, it's around 60 years ago. These men, those that are alive or have just passed on, would be in the 80s. So you're talking about people who are in the 20s or 30s. Young adults. Some come here single, get married here. Others come already married. In fact, I've got a list of all the marriages that took place in Newport from 1870s on.
It took place where?
In Newport.
Oh, okay.
At the Jewish community. It's kind of interesting.
Oh, it's fascinating.
And in fact, there's a little sociological, medical impact there. It's amazing the amount of second marriages that took place in this generation. And it would seem that the first wives apparently died in childbirth young, and the men get married again. And because this is the sort of thing that's never talked about, but all of a sudden you see these certificates, and on the certificate there's a column which indicates what this is the first, second, or third marriage. And there's quite a few cases where they were second, and even third.
Huh.
Which, oddly enough, in today's morals, which are out looser, you don't find there seems to be that many second and third marriages. But this could be imagination.
Yeah.
Now they don't bother getting married.
Well, what kinds of things did your family do together as a family activity, non-working, but for fun?
Well, as I was growing up, I know my sister moved away when I was real young. So I know the Mount Hope Bridge had just been opened.
Now, that was 1929?
And so, in fact, my dentist's wife was the little girl who swung the bottle that christened the bridge.
Really?
Yes,
No
and
kidding.
she's still living.
Oh.
Seeing that connected the island with the mainland, because when my sister first went to school,
Now, where did she go to school?
in Bryan and Stratton was the business school at the time, in Providence.
In Providence, okay.
You see, we would drive her up to Bristol, and she would take the ferry from Bristol, from Newport to Bristol.
So now, with the bridge, did she come back and forth very much?
Well, then she became a young girl, a young lady, went off to New York and then to Washington. So I really did not grow up with a sister in the house, except when I was a little one, which I don't have too many recollections. My brother and I were fairly close. Our big thing was going down to the theater, the movie houses, Saturday afternoon for a dime.
Uh-huh.
especially the Opera
As
House.
much as that.
Yeah. Because then when I tell this to people, they say, I remember going down for a nickel.
Yeah.
But I remember the dime. And we'd always take the worst seats in the house, and they were our special seats. And I remember that very vividly. And we used to go every week to see a certain serial shown at the Opera House. Into the Net it was called, featuring Jack Mulhall. I'm sure that name don't mean anything to you.
No.
Does that mean anything? Have you heard that name lately?
of course.
Jack Mulhall? And see, that was the highlight of the week for us. Remember,
Now, did your family have a car, or?
I remember my father's first car. He bought a very expensive car. He bought a Pontiac. That was his first car. That car cost $800. When you reflect that the Ford in Plymouth cost $400. This was an expensive car.
Do you remember what year that was?
Probably the late 20s. I don't recall specifically.
Now, would the family go places together in this
Well,
car?
This was the type of business that was either a 7-day week or a 6.5-day week.
Oh, okay.
So the big thing then was the Saturday afternoon, the Sunday ride in the car, and perhaps the movie. We didn't go out to restaurants in those days. My mother never believed in eating out, so we'd always eat at home. And but I think this is typical. They work from early in the morning till late at night, and except for the occasional meeting or the charitable work, which I suppose today sounds rather a drab existence. But you've got to remember that everybody was in the same boat. As I say, in this particular case, was 60 of your co-religious in the same business, plus the others were in other types of business and so forth. This is before your white-collar generation, because your white-collar people, our first Newport-born Jewish doctor began to practice in the 20s, and the first lawyer was at the beginning of the century. Our first white-collar man was 1902, 1901, that year. And of course he was the community celebrity, because he was the first guy that made it big. He became a lawyer, then became a judge, and so forth. And in research, when looking at all the community-wide fairs, he, it seems to me, spoke at every fair that ever occurred.
Well, now,
he was a unique phenomenon.
Was the Jewish community in one geographic area, or were they?
No. During the 20s, I would say close to 50% of the Jewish population lived in the West Broadway area.
Mm-hmm.
This was an area that was predominantly Jewish, and I'm told Irish at the time. And I believe part of it was called, and once in a while you'll still find somebody referring to it as Kerry Hill, which refers to
I haven't come across that. Yeah.
which refers to the Irish element that lived there. And this was a very nice area. Later on, it became a black area and a poorer area. Because when the Jewish and Irish people began to make it, they began to move out to other areas.
And where did they tend to go then?
It spread citywide. My folks, on the other hand, although I would say 50% lived in the West Broadway area, that means West Broadway, Burnside Avenue, Calendar Avenue, Pond Avenue, Pearl Street. If you want to extend it a little bit, that include Warner Street and then maybe the Point section. There were a few families in the North End. On Bliss Road, there was myself and another family. On Thurston Avenue, there was a family. A couple on Summer Street, I guess. Pleasant Street. Depending where, and here I have no answer. I don't know where the North End begins and where it ends. So where these people were North Enders or not, I don't know. But most of the people were down there. But we were one community, because I was a Hebrew school, and all the kids went in those days. It was an automatic thing.
How did you get around? By bicycle? Or
Footmobile.
Footmobile, okay.
That's right, by foot. When you grew up, you went to Rogers High, wherever you lived, and you would walk.
And that's when it was on Broadway, not
That's right.
where it
That's
is
right,
now.
Broadway. Because before our time, it was at a different location. I think where the old Y was on Mary Street. I think that was the original. No, I'm not sure, but I think that's where the original Rogers High was. So it was a coherent type of community. So that even though within the community, that particular community, there were divisions, ethnic, different national backgrounds, and just like in this country later on, the Yankees and the rebels, though all Americans, cited distinct differences, not only in geographic location and in accent, but they would see different characteristics. Of course, the other side always had the unflattering characteristics. So within, and I'm sure this would make sense to you, within the Jewish community, depending on what your national background, whether you came from Russia, Germany, Hungary, Romania, and so forth, you would associate, I don't know how real this was, but you would associate different characteristics with each group. One was more armed than the other, one was a group of horse thieves, one were liars, one had bad tempers. Now, how real this was, I don't know. But real or unreal, they were perceived to be real. And indeed, this is a very important sociological factor in this country because this had much bearings not only in Newport, which was true only on a small scale, but nationwide. This was a very big dividing factor within, a divisive factor within the community, because it ties in with other things. You've got to remember that going back to colonial days, the first Jews that were culturally inclined and had it made in the old country were the Spanish Portuguese.
Mm-hmm.
So when the German Jews come in a little afterwards, or at the same time wherever, the Spanish Portuguese lorded it over the others because they were superior. Supposedly the German emigration doesn't begin until the 1840s and 1850s. If you recall your European history, remember the failure of the liberal revolutions in Europe, and especially in Germany, I think it was 1840. There was a very mass emigration out of Europe, including many Jewish families, to this country. Most of them vied towards the big cities. In fact, remember the book Our Crowd?
Yes.
That crowd developed out of this in New York. So that these people come in the 1840s, 50s, and 60s, 20, 30 years later, they have it made. They've made money, they're culturally absorbed into the mainstream, so that when the next immigration comes in from Europe, this is now World War time, say the 1870s now, 30 years after the other one, say, and then around World War I, this includes the East European, Russian, Polish, Hungarian, Romanian Jews. So now it's the German Jews that are riding high, and they look down upon the other. And within various communities, this is an important thing. Today, if you have an intermarriage, people tear their hair. My child married somebody from another faith, and it's terrible. Well, in those days, if you married somebody from a different national background, it almost had the same impact. And in our own time, when that sociological trend dies down, then you have the development of Reform Judaism and Conservative Judaism, along with the old Orthodoxy, so that the people used to tear their hair out, or somebody married from a different group. Now, if it's a different religious background, people would tear their hair
Well,
out.
now, did you
Now that's starting to wind down.
Did you have a sense of your Russian heritage in terms of what went on in the home?
Well, I tell you, in our town, in the town that I grew up, we were very well aware of all this, but it was all on a good-natured basis. Probably on the bottom of the scale with the Galicianas, right?
Right, and the Litvaks.
Hmm?
And the Litvaks.
And well, I'm from a Litvak background. My wife is from a Russian background. So even today, but it's all good nature. Say, what do you expect from him? He's a Galiciana, He's almost like a Yankee would say, what do you expect from him? He's a miserable rebel, He's a lousy rebel, And,
well, was your socializing as a kid with people from other Jewish children, or did you, was there
all right, now,
intermingling with the other ethnic groups?
I lived in the North End,
right,
where there were very few Jewish families. So I had sort of a dichotomy here. After school, we would go primarily to Hebrew school and associate with the Jewish kids. But otherwise, when it came to play, it was always nobody really paid much attention to what the background is. Our store was on the corner of Bliss Road and Finley Place. most of the families, as I grew up, came from Irish Catholic backgrounds. But intermingled in there were a couple Protestant families. And of course, down on my corner, we were Jews. But as we grew up, it didn't, nobody paid any attention to that. You accepted on your own merits. Of course, later on there might be a religious element into it, but we had very little of that in Newport. Once in a while you'd find a little bit of prejudice here or there, but my best friends when we grew up were, I'd have to almost think what they were. I guess mostly Irish Catholic. And again, keep in mind, these people come from a persecution background also. So there seemed to be a certain kinship there, I suppose. And all our customers were primarily a non-Jewish background. We had practically no Jews for customers. They were all, I would say, primarily Irish Catholic. And our best friends, and my father's best friend was the city clerk then, and he was from a Protestant background. He lived up the street a little bit. His son became a dentist, and that man's son is a very prominent lawyer in town now. So it's really the American scheme all over again, regardless of the original background.
When you played with these kids in the neighborhood, what kinds of games did you play?
Oh, heavens. Whatever was contemporary at the time. I don't remember the details. I suppose hide and go seek. There's a game called hooky, I think it was called. You point your stick,
Yeah.
and you had to hit the end with another stick and see if you can get into a circle.
One a cat.
Hmm?
One a cat.
Is that what you call it? I forgot what we call it. I thought it was called hooky or hockey, or it wasn't hockey, obviously. And then it was, of course, marbles. With the circle, you have to flip the marble. There's another one game called, and I don't remember the details to save my neck, but somebody along the line would yell, "La La Least Dog." Does that mean anything? La La Least Dog, and I don't remember the details. Once in a while you get somebody, I remember some kids that I didn't particularly care for, they only liked military games, play soldier. Well, I never went for that. I still don't go for that. You know, as a veteran,
Yeah.
I don't like the military.
Well, while we have this plot, maybe I'll go back. We're going all over the place, which is all right. But let me finish this one section.
It sets the stage more or less. I
Oh,
think.
it's just wonderful. Did anyone live with you besides your parents? Your immediate family. Any relatives or lodgers or?
I remember when my aunt and uncle, one of the aunts and uncles, came from New York. Until they found the place got settled, they did stay with us for a while.
Mm-hmm.
And in doing my research for the work that I'm doing, I ran across a couple instances where I see people lived in my house before I was aware of it. And when I told my brother and sister about it, they were stunned. They have no recollection of these. Yet in the city records, it shows certain people from that address that I had no recollection of whatsoever.
So you don't
But
know.
on the whole, though, it was a self-contained unit.
Okay. You mentioned that your father was involved in charitable activities, like this family circle that he.
Well, that was primarily a social.
Okay. Were there other things he was involved with in the community?
He was a member of the Hebrew School Board. They have a Hebrew school here called the United Hebrew School, which encompassed all elements of the Jewish community. He was involved in that. I think for a while he was chairman of it. The big social group beginning in the 20s was the B'nai B'rith, which is still strong.
Of which you're writing a history, or have written?
Yeah, it's in the other room. That went over like a lead balloon yesterday. It was poor timing on my part, but I had no way of knowing that. Before that, during World War I days, they had a YMHA, a Young Men Hymns Association, which was the primary social mover then. I would say probably between 1870 and 1914, maybe around 20 organizations were created to serve the various needs of the community. By the 20s, only half a dozen of them had survived.
Yes.
Real society.
Burial Society. Inherent within the Jewish mystique, shall we say, as respect for the dead. And there were always, through the ages, I guess, a burial society. I think the contemporary type called the Heracadisha, I think began in Europe in the middle of the 18th century, I believe. Middle of the 19th century. In Newport, it began from what I can see, documentary-wise, the World War I days. And it existed in various forms and variations. And now we have one that we call the Heracadisha Association of Newport, which emerged last year, or the year before, as a result of a merger between two other groups that existed, and two other groups, one of which took care of the cemeteries on Farewell Street, and the other one took care of the cemeteries in Middletown, all belonged to the Jewish community.
Yes.
This one merged the so. So the other documentary proof I have of anything in Newport, we found some stationery with the date, with the logo Heracadisha 1913. So it may have existed before that in various forms, but I'm talking about documentary proof.
The other game might be a game in New York called Ringolevio, where you say la la,
These
this
dogs?
dog. It might have been Ringolevio, which was sort of a chase game.
Yes.
You had to come across a line. Okay.
Yeah,
What about your mother? Did she have any activities outside the home?
Yes.
Did she have time for any?
Well, at this era, along with the men, the women had their own groups too. And Newport involved the Ladies Auxiliary of Congregation of Jews of Israel, which goes back to before World War I. They had a group called the Council of Jewish Women, which is a nationwide group, still in existence, though not in Newport. There was the Hadassah, which is the women's Zionist group, which is still growing strong in this country and in Newport, because its primary function is medical. The Zionist group itself, the male group, nowhere has the strength it used to, because with the formation of the state, many people thought there wasn't any need for it anymore. So while it's still in existence, it's not in existence in Newport now for several years. And during, if you recall before, I mentioned the fact that these people had to entertain themselves. I would say during the 20s and 30s, till World War II, at least another 30 organizations were created to satisfy their various needs. And this is all, I can document all this, whether it was Boy Scouts, now this is all the Jewish auspices, Boy Scouts, Sea Scouts that practically nobody remembers, a children's orchestra, Zionist groups for young people, cultural groups for young people, study groups for the adults, charitable organizations of all kinds. And see, one of the basic tenets of Judaism is charity. You cannot be a good Jew if you don't participate in charitable activities and give and so forth. But there wasn't any Jewish organized relief type of thing the way we have today until World War I. Yes?
I'm going to leave. I'll be back.
And please do so. You coming back for lunch?
I'll be back before I think.
Okay.
I'm going over to
Would you care to join us?
No, I'm going to Irving Talk.
All right, fine. Hope you make up. Okay.
Now, were you involved in any of these children's organizations yourself?
Not too many.
Or had they?
Well, the B'nai B'rith had a youth group then called the AZA. Does that mean anything? Aleph Zadik Aleph? Which today is called the B'nai B'rith Youth Group. But I was a little bit active in that. I didn't care for the Boy Scouts. I never cared for regimentation of any kind, even as a kid. So I did participate in some of those things. But now, already then, I'm in high school by this time, and of course then I went off to college. And from college to the military, and that's another story altogether.
Okay, well, we're going to get to that section. Now, you mentioned, did your parents have ambitions for you that you were aware of?
Well, again, Jewish people are known as the people of the book, which means the Bible. But through the ages, through Europe, the 18th and 19th, 17th centuries and before, because of the nature of society at the time, which in Europe, of course, was the old regime, Jews were always tolerated wherever they went by the government, whatever it was, whether it was a prince, a king, whatever. And if it was a benevolent type of thing, a situation, they would make out fine. If it suited the powers to be to persecute or to expel, they would do so. It was all arbitrary.
Mm-hmm.
It was not a democratic type of thing today. And this is because under the old regime, which began someplace around the Middle Ages and so forth, until the French Revolution, society was very highly structured. There was a place for everybody and everybody in that place. And what you did, what privileges you had, depended on your station in life. And everything was highly structured. And this applied to everybody except your aliens. And in Europe in general, the aliens were either your Greeks, your Jews, or the Moors. And cause the Moors would be those that were left after the Moorish Empire was defeated by the Christian empires, and they retreated back towards Africa. And so forth. But what emerged was the so-called ancient regime where you have this sort of thing. Now your aliens were tolerated only for what they could contribute to society in the eyes of the powers to be. Now this ruling group, generally speaking, only constituted 1 or 2% of the population. There is no middle class when this type of society begins. And the overwhelming numbers, which is what, over 90% of the population, were ignorant and very easily persuaded to hate and to persecute someone, depending on the whims of the other. If the ruling group, now when I say the ruling group, I'm talking now about the church, the clergy, the nobility, the military, later on the foreign service. All this is recruited within one small group of people. And everybody else is out until the system starts to break down little by little with the development of your middle class and the era of exploration and so forth. Meantime, the Jewish state had been destroyed, and the so-called diaspora had begun, and there was no Jewish homeland, and they spread all over Africa and Europe. And unfortunately, the Christian religion, which started out as a religion of love, right about the time of the Crusades and so forth, developed into a religion of hatred. Not only did they hate among themselves, but they hated anybody who wasn't Christian, and which was not the original foundation of Christianity. So that the Christians became very unchristian-like in their religious zeal to, you had to believe my way or no way at all. Of course, Islam today isn't any better. It's just better, if not worse, you see. So that your beginnings of anti-Semitism started right around the time of the Crusades. And now, because if you are in your ruling position and things are going bad, you want to blame somebody, who do you blame? Somebody who's defenseless, somebody who's a little bit different. And because of various customs, including those dictated by the church, that way of life open to, economic way of life open to the aliens such as the Jews, involved that type of activity that the church and other groups frowned upon, depending on what the particular situation was. So that commerce, money lending, in some cases retailing, all were left open to those who were not in the mainstream. Not that they wanted it that way, but they had no choice. Right. And so in any given situation where the prince or the king would say, we need economic help, then they would be tolerant. When the minority got a little bit too strong and too wealthy, we want these goodies for ourselves. So then you stir up the hatred. Now there's no middle class at this time to counteract any of this. The masses are ignorant. If the prince says these people are no good, or the prince says these people are no good, you hate. And so there's persecution. And the Jews in particular were expelled from every so-called civilized European country through the ages, beginning in the 1200s up until modern time, including France and England. And of course today when we think of France and England, we think of civilized peoples. But they did their share of persecuting too. Which is why the American experience is so such a breath of fresh air in real society. And though we don't think of it because we were a small town, Newport had its position in this great drama.
Of course.
That bridged the different societies. But that's a different topic
Okay.
altogether.
So in terms of your parents' aspirations for you, they encouraged you
Well,
to.
the reason for why I went to
Yeah.
all this is this. You see, these people then not only were different economically, but socially and religiously, they lived in a world of their own. And eventually the so-called ghetto developed, in which the Jews were physically forced to live within a limited area. But by the same token, culturally and religiously, they are withdrawn. So that their whole lives revolve around the Bible, the authority of the rabbis, and in many cases, a dual set of governmental organization developed, a religious bureaucracy along with your lay bureaucracy, depending on the areas. And so these became withdrawn, and their whole life becomes the Bible, and its commentaries and its expansions and so forth. So the people became culturally minded that way. So a great respect for learning developed among the Jewish people. And this translates, when they come into this country, that they've got to do better for the coming generation. So the Jewish people are always culturally minded and education minded. And they realized then, as so many minorities now are starting to realize, that the answer to many things was education. So that particular generation, they were all small businessmen. Now you take a town like Newport, and you'll find just a very small amount of businessmen, and now you've got a large amount of doctors, lawyers, engineers, teachers, accountants, and so forth. And this is all this, of course, is based on learning. And this is sort of a natural sequence that goes
Right.
on. Now, a lot of the black people are now discovering this is the way to go. And for those who have broken the barrier down, it is on the basis of education and the love of learning. And then the other thing, of course, is that you go into these professions not because so much of the serious, because you're then on your own. You're not part of a machine who is not going to allow you to progress beyond a certain point. That's why, though anti-Semitism dictates that all these corporations are controlled by Jews and so forth, nothing could be farther than the truth. Because within this setup, the Jews could only go to a certain level. They wouldn't let them go any higher. Therefore, the emphasis on the professions where everybody was on their own, and you could become a success on your own. Of course, there were problems within the professions too, but in a different sort of way. Now, am I right?
Very much so.
Now, so was it unusual for your sister to have gone to school, or
No.
was that common in that
No.
day for women?
No,
You
I
think-
think but she went to business school.
Right.
Because remember, this is an economic, a time of economic hardship.
Right.
I think not too many of these people could go to a 4-year liberal arts school.
Now, what about your brother?
He went to Brown University, and from there he went into, he worked for a department store, then he went to jewelry business, retail, and then he went to insurance, where he's made a tremendous success in Fall River. He's very big in the community, not only professionally wise, but on his own he does an awful lot of work. I know the nuns in Fall River are crazy about it. In fact, when my father died, they came down here, a group of
Really?
them, yes, and in the mourning period. And he does a lot of work for them, and he gets them a lot of things that the church bureaucracy has difficulty doing because they have to go through bureaucracy.
Yeah.
When my brother finds out, it gets done, and he doesn't have to answer to anybody, so things get done.
And where did you go to school?
I also went to Brown, but my career got interrupted by World War II.
No, let's finish with the school first. You went to Rogers High. You said everyone went to Rogers High School.
Yes, well, unless you were Catholic, and many of those went to
Yeah.
De La Salle.
Okay. And what about grammar school? Were there many grammar schools?
Well, each neighborhood had its grammar school,
Yeah.
in addition to the parochial schools.
Okay.
We had Sheffield and Coxhill up this area. Now the breakdown is a little bit different. Now they have the Sullivan School I think the sixth grades were over there. The setup was a little bit different,
Yeah.
but then the primary concept was the neighborhood school.
Yeah.
Till the eighth grade, I believe. Then everybody went down to Mumford.
Okay, you mentioned going to Brown, and then when did you graduate from Brown?
In 41.
Yeah.
I-
And then there was a war about to start then
well, it
in
did
this
start.
country.
Yeah. I had started work on my master's when I got interrupted. I had a half a course and a thesis to go when I got drafted.
Oh, really? And where were you going for your master's?
At Brown also. And through a set of circumstances of which I'm not going to go into now, I was able to complete my half a course while I was still in service. And when I went back, I wrote my thesis and got my master's. By that time, there was a whole new ball game, and I never went into the profession that I really wanted to go into. And this is a different story
Right.
altogether.
Okay. The next series of questions relate to religion, and so was it Touro Synagogue that your family was in? Your father and mother were involved in, and you have subsequently been active with that.
That's right. There was another congregation here, beginning of World War I days, which lasted until 2 years ago.
Oh,
Also an Orthodox synagogue. A considerable group began here around 20 years ago, and they're going strong. A lot of the younger people.
is that the Temple Shalom,
Shalom.
on Valley Road?
That is right.
Yeah, right.
And well, now we also have a Reform Havurah, which is more of a brotherhood type of thing. It's smaller numbers, and they don't wish to become a formal congregation, at least not yet. And so some of the people even younger than the conservatives, with some exceptions, are involved in the Havurah. But most of my generation went to Torah because there really wasn't that much choice. And of course, since then, it has become a national shrine,
Right.
a historic shrine, recognized as a symbol of religious liberty all over the world. And of course, since the 50s, there was a major restoration in the 50s. And then we organized a sister group called the Society of Friends of Torah Synagogue to help support it because of the principle of separation of church and state. Although we are a national historic shrine, there is no money. So though we have subject to all kinds of regulations, there's no financial support,
Yeah.
so we're on our own. Well, and we managed to do pretty good as far as that goes. But almost everybody who was anybody belonged to Torah Synagogue. And I say this with tongue-in-cheek because this other group was primarily organized as a working man's congregation.
And which one? This was the
opposite.
one that lasted until.
Until a couple of years
Yeah.
ago.
Okay.
Okay, so if you recall what I said before, and here's where everything begins to tie
Yeah.
in. I told you that about 50% of the Jews at that time lived in the West Broadway area. So we find that this group organized in the West Broadway area. And they thought they wanted a place where they could go to services, say Friday night and Saturday, without having to go through the streets and getting dressed and cleaned up and dressed and so forth, and walking through Broadway and Spring Street to go up to Tourist Street. Here they could go right from work without bothering to clean up and get dressed into their own little synagogue, which was organized in that area before they moved out a little later on.
Now, what was the size of the Touro congregation?
Well, in the 20s, I would say there must have been well over, not well over, but somewhere around 100 families in town. Probably 60 or 70. Here I'm just guessing now.
Yeah.
I'd have to check the actual rules. Belong to Touro. And the others belong to Avazachim, with some dual memberships. But they were primarily the working man type of thing. High society went to Touro.
Okay. Now, how did your family spend the Sabbath?
Well, we belonged to that generation. It was a working man generation. The store was open 7 days a week. And so, as a young man, I would go to services. I don't recall my father going during the Sabbath. He just couldn't. But you see,
The
my father was a
major
special case anyhow.
holidays he would go?
Oh yes.
Yes.
Yes. And even some of the minor holidays. But my father was recognized during his days as one of the 2 or 3 learned men of the community, lay
Mm-hmm.
learned men of the community. He and a couple of others were the ones that knew more about the Bible than anybody else, except for, of course, the rabbis, whoever would be there. And he enjoyed that reputation right to the end.
Now you mentioned Hebrew school. So this was something that you were involved in as a kid.
Yeah. Now, the difference between a Hebrew school of that type and a parochial school is that a parochial school was in lieu of public school.
Right.
A Hebrew school of this type convened after public school. And you would meet, say, from 4 to 6 or whatever, depending on a particular time, or set up either every day of the week or several times a week, in addition to Sunday school. Now, of course, in many cities you have the so-called Hebrew day school, which is the equivalent of a parochial school, and that meets during the day. But a Hebrew school met after hours.
And this was up until the time you were bar mitzvahed?
That's right.
And this happened to you?
Yes.
And that happens, what, about age 13?
That's right. In those days, this did not happen to girls. Now, within the conservative and reform group, they have it for girls now, too.
Was your family close to, you mentioned your father was considered a learned man. Did you have social contact with the rabbi, or?
In those days, the rabbis would come and visit quite often. And depending on the particular rabbi and how socially inclined they were, most of them did include my father regularly in their visits. But after all, it was somebody they could talk to. And you can remember, this is a generation that came from Europe. Not everybody had a religious training there as well as here. So there weren't that many really educated people. So there were a few exceptions. I wish my father happened to be one. And that's why he was involved in almost all these groups, and especially into the charitable groups, which, as I say, is a mainstay in Judaism. And all this began in this country, I started to mention, and I won't go into too great detail now, but in this country, all this developed around World War I time.
Mm-hmm.
And the organized charity that you see today goes back to that particular day. Because when the Jews in Europe began to undergo the hardships, either by the pogroms immediately before World War I, and then, of course, the Jews in Europe were caught into the fighting like everybody else and needed relief, there wasn't any international set up to help these people. And this sort of endeavor began in this country, in New York, during World War I days, and 3 different groups, which resulted in a 4th group developed. I'm very happy and proud to say that all these things that developed in New York and that were nationwide all had their counterparts in Newport. So that the first one was an Orthodox organized one, and they reached the average person. And then they realized that they weren't reaching the biggies, so a reform group developed. And then a liberal group developed, and they operated on, it was either $1 a week or $1 a month set up, and people would go around collecting the $1 from the poorer people, so that everybody participated in the relief of the poorer brethren in Europe who were subject to the winds of war. And then something called the Joint Distribution Committee developed out of that. And in our own day, various different developments occurred, so that now we have a more sophisticated type of relief. So that you have permanent organizations with paid help and your annual drives and so forth. But all in a sophisticated, highly organized type of way. But this all goes back to World War I days.
Well, you mentioned, speaking of war, you were drafted in 1941, was it?
Yes.
Yes. And you served for how long?
3.5 years.
And where did you spend that?
I spent it in the States. I was the only man in my outfit that didn't go overseas. Because by a quirk of fate, I happened to be on detached service at the time that they broke up the fort that we were at. And my people all went off to Europe. I was at detached service. I was at a school in Denver, Colorado.
Oh.
And I didn't find out until later that they didn't know what to do with me. But they finally made some kind of decisions, and I finished my service in here. I know my predecessors at the fort I was in ended up in the Italian campaign.
Oh.
My crowd ended up in Europe at the time. I was one of the few that didn't get over there because of this particular quirk of circumstance.
So when you you were discharged. You came back to Newport then?
Yes, I came back to Newport, decided to get my degree, and I thought I'd see if I couldn't get into teaching, but it didn't work out.
Right.
Didn't work out. Just one of those things. Excuse me
All
for
right.
a moment.
Okay, we're continuing.
Till the waterman comes up.
Let's see. You met your wife. And what's her name?
Emily.
Emily. And how did you happen to meet her?
All right. My father-in-law originally was in a manufacturing business in Boston. He was a victim of the Depression, and the type of hat that he manufactured went out of style or something. So he had family in Philadelphia.
Mm-hmm.
So my wife was born in Boston, but they went to Philadelphia and she was raised in Philadelphia. They decided to come back this way for a visitor, and they had relatives in Newport, a nephew or something, and so they stayed over in Newport. They tended to stay for a little while, and I met my wife.
So you
this-
turned on your charm.
So this transient trip that was supposed to be just a temporary thing became a permanent thing, and he bought a small business here, and he settled here, and we got married, which was a break for me because when I came back from service, there were very few people my age here, and I looked forward to a very dreary sort of thing, and she was sort of a breath of fresh air.
Yeah, and what year was this now that you got married?
Do you have to ask embarrassing questions?
No, I guess I
We just
You don't have to answer
We just
any
celebrated our 36th anniversary
Oh,
last week.
wonderful.
So do a little mathematics.
Okay.
Does that become 48 or 49? 48, I think.
Okay. And where did you live when you first got married?
Temporary. We worked out a deal with my father. He needed some help in the store. My teaching prospects didn't materialize, so he asked me to come in with him. And we took an old house that he owned, and we decided to fix it up. But until we had time to fix it up, we temporarily moved in with my father-in-law and mother-in-law, who at that time lived on Broadway.
Uh-huh.
Then this particular house, which has a very fascinating history, is a colonial house that originally, do you know where the Opera House is in Newport?
Yes.
Right above Opera House is a little alley.
Yeah, right. That's where Dr. Just is, right? In that building?
Right behind there, this house, during colonial days, stood there.
So what street is that then? Mary? No.
I think it's called Turo Court.
Oh, okay.
And there was a Catholic school right behind there also, which just got torn down within the last few years. And this house was there, and in architectural circles it was called the Robbins House,
Okay.
after Senator Robbins, who lived there at the time. In the 1800s, it was moved from there to its present location and another addition put on. We researched this someplace along the line,
right.
and we traced it back to a Colonel Belcher, who was a colonel in the Revolutionary Army in Washington's time.
Right.
In fact, he got married by Ezra Stiles, the famous Newport clergyman, who became president of Yale University later on.
Okay.
And we traced the house back to him. In fact, I call it the Belcher Robbins house. I put a
Okay.
plaque on the house.
Oh.
We sold it a few years ago. So we lived there until we bought this particular house. My wife had surgery.
You mean this house that we're in right
Yeah.
now?
My wife had surgery on the back. That house involved 3 stories.
Oh.
And the doctor says, I want you on a one story, one
Mhm.
family, so she won't have to march up and downstairs. So we began to look for a house, and I will say I became an authority on all the old houses in Newport. They showed us all the old junk and all. It was terrible. It's a long story of how we got onto this house, which I don't want to go into now, but we bought this in 1961,
Uh-huh.
and we lived here ever since. And we're very happy with it. I couldn't afford to buy the house today, believe me, in today's prices. Which should come as no surprise.
Now, your children. You have 3 children. They're all boys. You told me the other day. When they were born, did you have any help from anyone, or did you and your wife
Well, my
do it on your own, or were
when-
the in-laws important, or?
Well, as newborns, we had some professional help,
Mhm.
and nurses that we had until then we got acclimated. And then my mother would come in. Meantime, my mother-in-law, father-in-law bought a house up on Thurston Avenue, and she would come over every day and help my wife with the little ones. And that's the way they grew up. They went to Sheffield School, and then I guess Rogers High had already been developed. And this time, my cousin was one of the those behind the building of the new high school, Dr.
Oh.
Adelson, who before your time, he was Mr. Big in medical circles in Newport for many years.
Were the children born in the hospital?
Yes, Newport Hospital.
The same, is that the same one that's here now?
Yeah, Newport
Yeah,
Hospital?
right.
Yeah.
It had some recent additions to it,
Oh,
but
yes.
the base is the same.
Newport Hospital, though we always think of Newport Hospital as Newport Hospital, it underwent many, many changes through the years. Through a one-story building on before my time on Friendship Street, and then additions, and then more additions, and more additions. And then, of course, a few years ago, they went into the setup that they have now,
Uh-huh.
which is still in a process of change.
Were your children told stories about the family? About your grandparents and their
Well,
grandparents?
Not too much. In fact, I regret to this day, in retrospect, that my father and mother didn't talk as much as they should have. They always referred, and I'm sure this sounds familiar, to their home, the home. That was always
Uh-huh.
Europe. But I know none of these people ever broke their back to get back there. That I had some Jewish friends and as many non-Jewish friends.
Now, you were, at that time, the kids were born in the 50s then?
Yes, when we lived
And
on Gibbs
you-
Avenue. Yeah, at our previous house.
No,
The old
when did
colonial-
you went from Turo Court?
At the house, yeah.
Yeah.
And then I moved up to here back before World War One, where an addition was put on, and that house has been a fixture there at the corner of Bliss Road and Gibbs Avenue.
Right, that's where you moved to when the children were little then?
No, when we got married.
Oh, when you got married.
That's right.
Well, what about the house over on Turo Court?
That's the house that was moved up here.
Oh,
I'm sorry, I didn't make
okay.
myself
Oh,
clear
all
on
right.
this.
And, all right, so the house was moved from Turo Court up to Gibbs and Bliss
That's right.
in,
Oh, late 1800s.
okay. That's considered the North End also?
Yes.
Okay.
I don't know. I always consider the North End, starting with Bliss Road.
Yeah.
I don't think there's an actual geographical delineation here. I don't know whether it's a frame of mind as well as a geographical delineation, but it's. I don't know whether you could describe it in terms of wards or not. The fourth ward, or the fourth ward is downtown. Whether it be the first or the second wards or whatever, I'm not sure. But it was this end of the city. This part of Broadway, beginning around Bliss Road,
Mhm.
including all the side streets all the way up here. You realize this area that you're in now, during were all empty fields until World War II. There was an army fort in this area.
Oh,
during
well,
World-
I
yeah.
didn't know that.
There's still a bunker. You still can see a bunker if you know where to look.
Huh.
Just the next street
Yeah.
over. So before World War II, this was all fields. In fact, this part around here was a little bit swampy.
Hmm.
So most of our playing days were not in officially designated playgrounds like Vernon Playground
Yeah.
or whatever. We always had these fields, of which we had numerous. And you were playing different fields for different purposes or whatever. Play baseball, football, or whatever. And the various different parts. Because this end of the town has just become so densely settled since World War II. Most of this area
Right.
is all new. And a lot of the street that you're on here, Topa Boulevard, goes back to the 60s and late 50s and so forth.
Now, your children, you told me the other day the three boys all went to college.
One is
one's
still going.
One's a lawyer in Providence, and he's married.
Yeah,
And
well,
has-
about to get divorced, yes. He has 2 little girls.
Uh-huh.
The second fella just got married last October,
Now he's in Vermont, right?
New Hampshire.
New Hampshire. He's a lawyer in New Hampshire.
That's right.
Now, did the boys go to Brown also?
No, well, my son went, number 1 son went to Brown.
Yes.
Number 2 son went to, oh gosh, it's a small Lutheran school in New Jersey, Uppsala.
Oh,
or
right.
Uppsala, I think
Okay.
they pronounce it. The third fellow went to Clark, which is in Worcester, Mass.
Oh, okay. And he's now at Northwestern
Yeah.
working on his doctoral studies in...
In government primarily. His primary interest is China. But in view of the fact that he's a very poor linguist, he couldn't go into it as deeply as he wanted to
Yeah.
from that aspect. He just can't do languages. As bright as he is, he just can't do languages.
I can understand that. So,
Sometimes
it,
I think English is a foreign language.
so did each of the hope that you had for your children in terms of where they've ended up is, it sounds like they've done very well.
Well, I guess we either want to go into teaching or into law. So now I've got 2 lawyers and 1 who wants to go into teaching.
Well, that
But
sounds...
they're all smarter than I am. So
Yeah.
it's,
Yeah.
just ask them, they'll tell you.
Now, that sort of takes care of the one section on children, and the final section for this interview is on the neighborhood, and we've already talked quite a bit about the neighborhood. So I can go through and see what we've missed. You mentioned that you've lived in this house since
The 60s.
Since the 60s, but you've been in the neighborhood all your life.
I've been in North End all my
Right.
life.
And when you first moved into this house, that was at the time when it was fairly newly developed,
Yes.
and were there still fields? I mean, was this area completely developed then, or were there still...
It was, I would say it was mostly developed, mostly.
Has it changed much since you moved into this house, or is the neighborhood pretty much the same?
Well, I think you have to give a sociological answer for that. I believe it's a proven fact that neighborhoods change, every 20 years or so?
Yeah.
And I think this is true. Because in any given neighborhood, you'll find 1 or 2 old timers that seem to last for 50, 60 years. But in between, the families grow old and move on. Also, instead of an older, settled community, all of a sudden you got a lot of young families. Well, you take it, if somebody goes in as a young bride and groom, they stay there for 20, 30 years. Now they were the young kids on the street then. Now they've been there for 30 years. The people old timers then have either died or moved on. So now the people who were new then are now the old timers.
Yeah.
There's new people coming in.
What's the cycle like in this area now?
Well,
Are there many young people around now? or-
I think there are some. So I think you'll find them mostly would be the middle-aged people. I would think, overall speaking. And again, it's a cosmopolitan group here. As overall, I don't think you could discern it as being predominantly ethnic one way or another.
Yeah.
There are all kinds here. And it's not the friendliest neighborhood in the world, but it's not exactly antagonistic either.
Do most of the people own their own homes in this neighborhood?
From what I could see, almost exclusively, I would think. There is some rental. But in most cases, I think you'll find that people live in their home-owned and home-lived in, but with apartments. Like we have an apartment here, too. But in most cases, I don't think homes are rented. And they're all lived in by the owners.
So there's not too much contact socially among the neighbors, and is that different from the way it used to be, or has it always been?
It's hard to say. I think that depends on the neighborhood. I know in this particular neighborhood, although we couldn't participate because we were always busy, for a few years they would have a neighborhood fair here. And they would seal off the street, and they would have all kinds of foods and games too, I guess, but we could never go because it was always on a Saturday afternoon, and that's when it was a busy time for us because we were in retail business at the time and we couldn't go. But that hasn't happened in the last few years. But people are friendly. I wouldn't say they're chummy,
Yeah.
but and when I walk with my dog, a lot of people are happy to see us. Other people hate to see us coming for obvious reasons.
Okay, your dog is so wonderful. That's right, Husky.
I think I've become a neighborhood character and fixture with the dog. Right, Hus?
What about friends of you and your wife? Do they come from the neighborhood or from the organizations you belong to?
My wife has she belongs to two different mahjong groups.
Mm-hmm.
That's the predominant game with them. And she has her charitable groups, and they're DASA and so forth, and the Ladies Auxiliary. She's a treasurer of a couple of the groups. And I'm involved in my groups. She's also treasurer of Turo Synagogue, which I was president a few years ago. But I get involved in a lot of different things.
Well, that's this question I know is going to be answered at great length. Your participation in the wider community.
What do you mean by wider community?
Well, outside of this immediate neighborhood, maybe what we could get down now are the many activities that you have, and
how many days do you used to spend on this? I hate to talk about myself on this.
Well,
but,
this is something that I think is very important, and you're certainly very knowledgeable. And
I was the head of the Liquor Association for several years. In fact, I was the driving force behind it for many years. I was secretary of the Brown Club for a year or so. That's Brown University Club, the Newport Club, that is. I was active in the World Affairs Association when it was active here.
no, I don't know anything about that organization.
I believe it's still active elsewhere, though it's not active in Newport. I became very friendly with Claiborne Pell here at the time. We used to look forward to seeing each other at that particular group. They would have speakers from all over the world come here. And I was very active in the Newport Civic Music, which again, I don't know whether it's still active nationwide or not, but at that particular time, before the era of television, this was a group nationwide that worked through a central organization in New York, I guess, where you would book concerts to come into your own particular area, and it was by subscription, open to members only, and depending on how many members you have and the amount of money you could raise, that would depend on the number of and the type of concerts that you would have. Now, we would have, say, a budget for around $2,000, which wasn't bad in those days. You could, for that kind of money...
And what years were these when you say those days?
The 40s and 50s. See, before the heyday of television.
Yeah.
And where this was a good source of cultural entertainment. And for this kind of money, you could get a group for $1,000, which would be a symphony orchestra. All right. And you can maybe get two groups for $400 or $500 each. And of course, the secret would be to try to get somebody on the way up before they command the big wages. And I'm told that Nelson Eddy sang here.
Oh, really?
As a youngster. I myself was involved. Does the piano team of Ferranti and Taika mean anything to you?
Yeah.
We had them here. And I remember we had a star of the musical show, Brigadoon, was here. And you'd get the chamber groups and your various groups, depending on the amount of money that you would have.
Yeah. Was this connected in any way with the Newport Music Festival?
This is pre-Newport Music Festival.
Are they connected in any way in terms of the evolution?
There's no logical progression there. There's no
Okay.
evolution there. It's completely
Separate.
completely unrelated
Okay.
movements. The advent of television has done as much harm as it has done good, I guess. It has made everybody self-sufficient unto themselves when it comes to entertainment. But before those days, to really get
Yeah.
anything, you depend on this sort of thing. And of course, then the jazz festival began, and I was in on some of the original talks, because the Laurelides were the family that started the jazz
Right.
festival.
Yeah.
Well, they would come to the World Affairs Council meetings too, one with Cleveland and Pell, so we would talk around
Mhm.
then. At that time, they were talking, starting a jazz festival.
Okay, that's,
And-
that's something we're going to get into in the next interview, if you'll let me come
Yeah.
back. um, you're a member of the Newport Historical Society.
For the
Yeah.
last 2-3 years.
Yeah.
And,
You use the library there, is that?
Yes, it's a fascinating place, and there's never any end to the surprises that you can find out. And they've got a remarkable woman there, Mrs. Bullhouse.
Yes, who's...
And of course, Tom Brennan is new there. and
Yes.
He's just finding his way around because he has much work to do to get that place properly organized, which is what he's trying to do. But Mrs. Bullhouse is a fountain of information.
Yes.
And a fantastic person.
Yeah.
And likely a very congenial person also. Very, very helpful. And of course, I've gone back to my first love, which is history.
Yes.
And I'm trying to do all this research, and I'm digging, and she's very, very helpful.
Now, some of the other organizations, you mentioned the Truro Synagogue. What has been your various roles with...
Well, I was president 66 and 67. I've been a trustee. Right now I'm a building trustee. And I've been on the nominating committee, so and I'm now the congregation historian and archivist. And of course I'm trying to write this book, and I'm still...
You want to mention what the book is about?
Well, it's going to be the history of Truro Synagogue and the Jewish community. 'Cause it's hard to discuss one without the other. Because after all, a synagogue is a building.
Right.
It's not people. So you really have two different things going on simultaneously, and it isn't necessarily quite the same thing. There are points where they become the same thing. There are times when you're dealing with two different entities altogether. And so I've been backjacked on that. I was head of the Zionist organization for a while, many years ago. I was head of the B'nai B'rith many years ago.
And now you're...
I'm the vice president.
Right.
I've sort of been recycled. And that because, like every other group now, Truro Synagogue, Congregation of Israel, and B'nai B'rith, I having problems like all the other organizations this time. This present generation, for some reason, became the me generation, the I generation. And they're not joiners. And while I'm told nationwide there's the beginning of a trend where they're starting to join again, this generation, it hasn't happened in Newport yet. And all the groups are in tough shape. I happened to be the main speaker at Truro Synagogue a few months ago for the Masons. I think I mentioned this on the last talk. And they came in en masse. They came in as a group. And there wasn't a young face. There must have been around 75 people there or so. And I didn't, by a young face, I don't think I saw anybody under 50. I could be wrong, but that's the
Yeah,
impression
yeah.
that I get. So that all groups are having this particular problem. And when I talk to people in B'nai B'rith and other cities, with some exceptions, they're all going through
Yeah.
the same thing. And without the recycling of people of my generation, everybody would be in tough straits. And of course, the type of thing that you saw yesterday, this type of programming, is part of an effort to reactivate the group and encourage people to come in so that we can draw new people on to carry on.
You're talking about B'nai B'rith now.
Yeah.
And you've written a history of B'nai B'rith in Newport.
In Newport, from 1924 to 1979. Which you'll have to look at after this if you'd like.
Yeah, I'd like to very much.
It's a unique document, I think. Whether we can make it a commercial success or not, I don't know. If I could sell 50 copies for the group, I would be happy. We could break even then. But if we don't sell 50...
Well, no,
we're not gonna break
some of
even.
the libraries would certainly buy copies, wouldn't they?
Well, I think they would be looking for freebies. I don't think
you
they
don't
would
think
buy.
so?
I could be wrong, but again, I'm not knowledgeable enough to... I will present the Historical Society with a copy, though, when we decide on the final physical format for the thing. But
So how do you feel about living in Newport in general? Do you have any thoughts of leaving, or is this...
No, if you're going to leave Newport at my age, you've got to think of a retirement sort of a community, and I'm certainly not retirement inclined yet, but you have to think in terms of warmer climate, which would be what, Arizona, California, or Florida. Well, while I like warm weather, I don't particularly care for hot weather. I like the seasons. I
Mhm.
like walking in the cold. It makes me feel very vibrant and alive. I've got my work yet to do here. I haven't finished my research yet. I want to get this thing written. It's going to take another 2-3 years, or perhaps even more.
This is on the Turo history.
On the Toro
Yeah.
history.
And then what do you have in the back of your mind after that in terms of projects?
I'm sure something will come along. I see unlimited for the rest of my
Uh-huh.
working life. I think I can keep busy. Because even if I get the book done, which I have to do eventually, there's going to be a lot of material that cannot be included. There's a wealth of material that will be suitable for monographs that can't get into the major. You can only go into so much detail
Yeah.
in your overall thing. So you have to make a subjective judgment. How much detail do you put in and how much do you leave out? But what do you do with the stuff that you can't put into the major text? There's still a wealth of material.
Yeah.
Now, I've written several monographs. I can show you that. They've been printed by the Newport Historical Notes, by not the Newport, the Providence Jewish Historical Society
Oh.
has notes. I'll show you the thing of it. Now, I've written a couple of things that are in there. I've got 2 more pieces coming in the next issue. One on how Touro Synagogue got its name,
Oh.
and another one on which I have given the unique title of History and Mystery on Farewell Street and White Road. That's the Jewish cemeteries in Newport, other than the original cemetery up
Yeah,
here.
right.
The historic one up there. And then I can show you in the next room, the Masons just printed the speech that I've heard before. It's in the other room. I'll show it to you if
Great.
you like. And there's always something. If you want to keep busy, keep busy. I definitely am not going to become a soap opera addict. I won't even put them on because I don't want to get involved. And I plan I can keep myself busy. I'm head of the Hebrew Kadisha. I can show you some of the work that we've done in the next room. We formed this group in '76 for the Farewell Street group because we found that some of these cemeteries there were in disgraceful condition because there wasn't any unified system of perpetual care for the Jewish cemeteries on there. So some of them were very, very unkempt and disorganized. And this is how I got involved with Hebrew Kadisha altogether from the historical viewpoint. When I discovered there were so many different elements involved that people didn't suspect, including organizations that are now defunct that had property in there. So we got it all organized together. We formed a corporation, got that organized, and we decided we'd start a file system. We've got a card system, which I'll show you. I got in the other room now. We have a card for every person buried on Farewell Street, and this goes back to the 1800s, with as much information as we can get on the family, on the families. Because eventually, this will become historic information.
Absolutely.
Because there's no question in my mind that because Newport, and this you may not be aware of, it's the second oldest Jewish community in the country. And whether this community exists or not, it will always be the subject of historical study.
Sure.
And even if it fails, somebody will come along, why did Newport go down the tubes? So there will have to be sources of information. The only book written per se on the Newport Jewish community was written by Rabbi Goodstein back in the 40s called, I don't know, I got it here someplace, but he was a rabbi and he did a good work, but it's primarily from secondary sources, and I'm trying to uncover what he didn't. And so I'm going to have to go over, some of the ground will have to be the same. I'm going to use a different perspective altogether. And where I'm going to make the cutoff, I don't know, probably around the 50s, I guess. There's no end to it, you know.
Yeah, I don't want to...
Oh, it's after 11 already.
Yeah, I know. What I don't want to miss at all is something that you have special knowledge of, and that's the Newport Jewish community, in terms of what it's like, you know, right now, or you know, for the last couple of decades. If you could,
the contemporary.
Right. If you could talk about that, I think that would be wonderful.
Well, keep in mind, like we said before, and again, you can check this out with people who know about sociology. I'm not that knowledgeable. Communities change every 20, 30 years, so that the present community, as you see today, is really a post-World War II community. Now, World War II is in the 40s, so that's around 40 years, but it's in a constant state of flux. And so the Jewish community today has within it only a small handful of families who trace themselves back to the community that organized in the 1870s and 80s. You may not be aware of the fact that during the 19th century there was no Jewish community in Newport at all. As you may or may not remember or realize, that whereas Newport was one of the 5 big cities of during colonial days, the British occupation of Newport during the Revolution killed Newport altogether. And what the Revolution didn't do, the War of 1812, and also a storm, which must have been a hurricane that came in 1815, just finished what was begun. So we find the last Jew left Newport in 1822. So between 1822 and the 1870s, there was no Jewish community at all. There were some Jewish visitors, and maybe an occasional guy coming through. I'm still trying to find out more about this particular type of thing. So that the Jewish community becomes reorganized. They start to come back to stay in the middle and late 1870s. In the 1880s, they begin to form, and the Congregation of Jesuit Israel became a corporation in 1893. From that point on until the present time, except for a very curious incident that happened in 1901, Torah Synagogue has been open on a steady basis. The community that began in the 1870s flowered and underwent a dramatic change during World War I. The community that I grew up into developed probably World War I and took shape in the 20s. When I say to the old Jewish community that I know about, I'm talking about that generation that came in around World War I, immediately before, during, and after. And these are the Russian, and the Polish, and the Romanians, Hungarians, and so forth, and Swedish Jews also. So they have their roots in the 1870s. They flower in World War I, in the 1820s, and in the late 1820s, a dream that they had since World War I to have their own community building took shape. And though they had begun work during World War I, nothing happened for obvious reasons until they bought the building that they're in now, which was on Washington Square, and they moved it up.
Oh, really? Is that the Levi?
The Levi Sheffield House.
Right.
Yes.
Okay.
So that was moved to where it is now, and it became the Newport Jewish Community Center, which was controlled by and known by Congregation of Jesuit Israel of Torah Synagogue.
No.
So, culturally speaking, organizationally speaking, it had what I call the golden age of the community center during the late 20s and early 30s. At that time, they had brought in a rabbi who was a community leader, the same guy who wrote the book that I mentioned about, and they brought in for a couple of years the one and only community director they ever had. And they were very strongly community-minded, and this is a group that organized 20 or 30 different groups.
And this was from about 100 families? That's how large?
Yeah. Now, since then, though people don't realize it has steadily grown, so that the contemporary community today has somewhere between 350 and 375 families, including singles. There are a lot of single people here in town also. The makeup of this community is completely different. And the reason why I went back to the point that I went to that we still have a few families whose grandfathers were among the first people who came here in the 1870s and 1880s. There's 2 or 3 families that are still here then. Their grandchildren are still here. But I would say now, going back to the 20s, this group, there's probably no more than 20 or 30 families that are still active in Newport. All these others have come in since World War II. And again, the makeup is completely different. Whereas this first group was the small businessman type,
Right.
It's that generation that became the doctors and the lawyers and the engineers and so forth. And what you have now is primarily people coming in town, especially engineers who are not born here, but are attracted here by the NESC and some of the other big corporations. But the makeup is completely different, sociologically speaking, whereas in the 20s and 30s, though there were 2 synagogues, socially speaking, they were pretty homogenized.
You mean it was a
homogeneous.
cohesive
Yeah,
group?
even though you had your jealousies and your petty things, your Russian and your German sort of thing, still, they had nobody else but themselves. See, today when you speak to where do you come from, Connecticut, Massachusetts, Virginia and so forth, you hop in your car and you're there in a couple of hours. Then, you couldn't hop in it. Number one, you didn't have a car. If you had a car, you didn't have roads. To go to Providence was an hour and a half. To go to Boston was 3 hours. To go to New York was 5 or 6 hours. It was a big project. So that their roots, their whole life, was here together. And this reflected in the golden age of the community center, where they had to supply their own entertainment, and they did. They did remarkably well. But then comes radio, then comes the automobile, then comes television, comes a completely mobile type of thing, where somebody's roots are nearby, not in Europe.
Right.
So that you're not confined to the area of Newport. Now, on top of that, whereas these people were not only from a homogeneous type of background from Europe, most of these people were small businessmen. I say 60 in the grocery business, then you had furniture business and clothing stores and all that stuff, but they all have this retail type of thing. See, now you have these people have children and grandchildren, or your doctors and your lawyers and your engineers and so forth. Now you have most of the people now in town are not born here in Newport, and they come in from other cities, and these people are not only a different from the economic background, but now the old Orthodox oriented type of community which was so prevalent then now has splintered, and so not only do you have Orthodox, which is now a smaller group in town, but you have a conservative group which is more appealing to many of the younger generation, and a smaller other group. So you don't have that, so that the Newport Jewish community really is not a community the way it was in the 20s and 30s. It's several different groups, and there are those of us who would like to see it work more closely together, but we're in a state of flux, and no one knows exactly how it's going to work out.
But is this different from any other city?
Yeah.
I mean, is this...
Well, the point is, in a bigger city,
Yeah.
what you would have, say, in a city like Newport, if you were community-minded, you acted in everything.
Right.
It
Okay.
was not only a synagogue, it was not only a social group, it was a charitable group. And then, of course, you joined your other groups, your Lions and your Kiwanis and your Masons and your Odd Fellows and so forth. The same fellows did all these things. In your bigger city, where you have several thousand people, some couldn't afford the luxury of splintering that
Yeah.
way.
But I mean, the problems are the way the situation is now is a reflection of society in general.
That's right.
I mean, it's the same kind of splintering and diversity that you would.
That's right.
I mean,
We don't need each other the way we used to.
Yeah.
We think.
Right.
Actually, we do, but we don't perceive it to be that
Yeah.
way. And so that, and you go into any home, and what do you find? From 1 to 3 television sets, any number of radios, depending on the number of kids. Every kid has his own radio. There's a stereo. Some places you still find books, maybe not as common as they used to be, but you'll still find books. And actually, a person could stay in his house for the rest of his life and entertain himself if he was so inclined. If you weren't gregarious, you could still live by yourself.
That's right.
See, in all these organizations are having this problem. See, back in 30, 40 years ago, the guys wanted to go out with the boys. You want to go to the Masons, to the Odd Fellows, to the Lions, to the Kiwanis, to the B'nai B'rith, to the Knights of Columbus. There, you want to be a big shot among your peers. But now it hasn't got that same need that was so important then. And this is going on with all ethnic groups. Now, I was startled to find, I won't mention the particular group, but it was a very, very big Protestant group. This man told a friend of mine who told me, and I happen to know the guy who was talking originally, this particular group, they brought in an extra priest for a minister for Easter. Now let's face it. What are the big holidays within Christianity? Easter and Christmas. Now you can't get any more important than Easter, right? So they bring in an extra minister, right? He said they had around 20 people show up for services. Now this is startling. And this is going on everywhere. Now the Catholics, who are such a strong organization, they're having all kinds of problems too. Which in a way is good, in a way is bad, I suppose, depending on your perspective. And I see it's good in one respect. The hold that they had 500 or 600 years ago, where they could go out and tell the people, these people are evil, they don't believe what you believe in, go out and kill them, and they would do it. I don't think they could get away with it today.
That's right.
Can you imagine the Catholic Church saying today, we're going to reactivate the Inquisition, and we're going to persecute people? They might get away with it in some places in Europe. I doubt if they would, but do you think that could happen in this country? I think you'd have I don't think that they would have that hold anymore. I really don't think so.
I think that I don't want to overstay our visit.
You mean the coffee is running out, is that what you're saying?
No, I just think that
Enough's enough?
well, we can pick up on this later. This is part 2 of the interview. It's Monday.
Is somebody from the mayor's office?
All right, we're going to start again after the telephone call. This is Monday, February 6th, 1 week after our first interview. And now we're going to talk about some of the major events that occurred in Newport and get Mr. Kusinitz's experiences and ideas about some of these.
Such as they are.
Such as they are. Now, World War I think is going to be somewhat limited in terms of what you can say, but I wondered if your father told you any stories about what Newport was like during World War I.
Not really. I really have nothing personal to say. The only thing I know of the community at that time is what I've done for my historical research, but it'll be nothing personal.
Yeah, well, that's kind of what we want to
So
stick with.
he had just come in from Connecticut to Newport in 1914, and of course the stories we got from him was the early struggle and getting along and so forth. But otherwise I couldn't tell you too much.
Okay. Now the summer colony had its heyday again in the earlier days when, but it has continued somewhat, and I'm interested in whether you knew anyone who worked at any of the big mansions, or whether your path crossed in any way.
My path really didn't cross. The heyday you speak to, of course, refers to probably the 1890s.
Well, or the early part of the 1900s.
That's right, and then the income
also.
tax came along.
That's right.
And
the Depression.
That's right. And Bellevue Avenue really doesn't get its renaissance till relatively few years ago. Most of the mansions were boarded down. I know the antique dealers had a heyday and they were around town offering all kinds of wonderful antiques for 50 cents and that sort of thing.
Now, when was that?
Today, this would be in the 20s and 30s.
Yeah.
Today, those things would be probably close to priceless.
Yeah.
And the only catch to this whole thing was that nobody had the 50 cents to spare at that time to pick up these bargains. But the focus, as far as the Bellevue Avenue type of people, was away from Newport at the time. The mansions were closed up. And of course they had grown up in the first place as a response to the need for this sort of thing. Because when the people first came back to Newport, say in the early 1800s, that whole area was farmland. And when people did come here to take advantage of the climate and the bay and so forth, which they did,
right?
Even though Newport had never made a renaissance, they would live in these houses and private homes. At least that's the way I understand it. Then came the hotel era.
Right.
And Newport was really blossoming, and was a mecca for literature Many famous writers were here. It was a mecca for architects.
Mhm.
And then I guess they decided they would have some cottages at this, progressing from the private homes to the hotels. And then a couple of the hotels burnt down.
Right.
And then the next place began, which was the summer cottages, what we call the mansions. And that had its heyday in the latter part of the 19th century. And it lasted, I guess, until the income tax era. And then these places were all bought up, became white elephants. And then the Renaissance came, of course, when I think you know how the preservation style.
Yeah, but there's a whole series on the preservation
Yeah.
that I'll get to later.
Yeah.
Now, did your father and his store ever deal with any of
No.
the household help
No,
from the
but,
mansions? Or?
No, but we bought a Cord automobile from one of the...
Oh, really?
Yes. Do you know what a Cord is?
How do you spell that?
C-O-R-D.
I never
This
heard
was
of it.
this was
Yeah.
a machine way ahead of its time, front-wheel drive. Someday you may see a picture of Gary Cooper standing in front of a car with a very long hood in front.
Uh-huh.
That was a Cord.
Okay.
And I remember that one in the city because a man came in our shop. It was a Saturday afternoon. And he
Now,
said,
what year was this?
In the 30s, I guess.
Yeah.
He said, I'm brokenhearted. I said, what's the matter? He said, I got a chance to buy a car once in a lifetime, but I got to buy it right now, this afternoon. The people are boarding up, going away for the winter, and they want to get rid of this car immediately. So I says, I'll go and look at it with you.
Uh-huh.
So he went and he came back with a Cord, C-O-R-D.
Yes.
Fantastic automobile.
Yeah.
If we had only kept it, it'd be worth a fortune.
So how long
So
did you...
in other words, people still were there and they were moving in and out, but
Yeah.
not on the grand scale that we see.
Well, so you didn't have any association that I mean, you were far away geographically
That's
from
right.
that area as
Commercial-wise,
well.
we had no commercial
Yeah.
contact, but we didn't cater to that type of trade.
Yeah.
We had 2 or 3 stores that catered to that. That are no longer existence. Tisdale's,
Now,
Murphy's.
were these on Bellevue Avenue
No,
or where?
Tisdale's was on Broadway. Murphy's was on Broadway and Thames Street, and the Marlboro Market was also on Thames Street. And there's one called Rooney's. These people catered to the to the Avenue trade. Plus
The
whatever-
carriage trade? Is
That's
it?
right. And later on there were stores on Bellevue Avenue that did the same thing.
Yeah.
Lafayette Market and that's the only ones that I remember. So I can't really tell you too much from the personal viewpoint.
Okay.
We knew we were there, but that was a different Newport. See, Newport was split into several different Newports. There was Navy Newport, Bellevue Avenue Newport, and the rest of us.
Hi.
Okay. Prohibition. Again, that was quite a while ago. But did you hear any stories from your father?
Yeah. Well, he was an extremely ethical man, and he refused to participate in anything that was illegal. So he never went in for it. But on the other hand, many people that he knew, and people that, of course, I knew, did go into the bootlegging, as it was called, and they made a lot of money. But he would never touch it. So
Were these other small businessmen in Newport? Is that what you mean?
Yeah.
And how would they? I mean, I've heard about the boats bringing in the liquor to the various coves and so forth.
I've heard those stories.
The rum runners, and then they would those bottles would go somewhere. Would they get into some of the smaller grocery stores, or?
Well, in some of them, yes, and some made enough money to go into wholesale businesses, and they become relatively wealthy. But not everybody did this, so not everybody cared for that sort of thing. And let's face it, there was a market for it, so these people supplied the demand.
Yeah.
And
As a kid, were you aware at all of?
I was aware of it, but it didn't mean that much to me. I knew there was prohibition. I knew about Al Capone and all that sort of thing, and I knew about the bootleg era and so forth. But it was in a detached sort of way. It didn't touch us personally.
So there were some people. I mean, there were people in Newport who felt that that might be illegal, but it wasn't.
No great crime.
Yeah, no great crime.
And unless I be misunderstood, these people that I'm referred to who went into this weren't necessarily bad people.
Yeah.
They were really very nice people. They looked at it as just another commercial need. And so they went into it. My father never cared for it.
Okay. Now, the Depression. How do you think when the stock market crashed in 1929, how did that affect the summer colony in Newport?
Didn't do him any good, that's for sure.
Yeah.
I think it's sort of, and again, I don't know this for sure, but it probably helped finish what the income tax situation started. You see, originally, if somebody made $1 million, they made $1 million. And labor was cheap. These people could build these huge places for relatively small sums of money in terms of comparison with today. And they would bring the maids over from Europe and pay them virtually nothing but living. They were living and so forth. So they could do this. And of course, when the Depression came along, then the income tax, which cut this big easy money off, and now the Depression, that helped finish it. So Newport's mansions were boarded up. So there's no two ways about it. And as I say, the topic of how they reopened is something
Right.
special altogether.
Now, the Depression and the rest of Newport. I know the other day you talked some about your father and how he extended credit to people. But
along with the average small businessman, I really believe that this type of store saw Newport through the Depression. But of course, afterwards, other developers just came along and killed the small store, and people just turned their back on them.
What are your recollections about how your life was affected by the Depression, your family life?
Well, of course, I was a real young one. I remember, I think my sister was away in school and on her own by that time. My brother, who was just 3 years older than I, went out and got jobs on his own to help out. I remember I knew something was going on, but I didn't know what. I remember I had a 50-cent a week allowance, and I volunteered to turn that back in. That they told me I did, but otherwise I don't remember too much distinctly. One of the clear anecdotes that comes to my mind, which in a way, if you could take one incident to sort of epitomize what happened, I remember very distinctly. We had a food store at the time. We had a farmer come in. At that time, there were many more farmers than there are now. And
You mean on Aquidneck Island?
on Aquidneck
Yeah.
Island. And they all grew a variety of different things. This fellow came in with a bushel or whatever it was of corn on the cob, and he asked my father to buy it. My father says, I can't because I just bought some from someone else. Well, the man said, I'm going to leave it anyhow. If you sell it, you'll pay me. If not, throw it away. So that sort of gives you an indication of how things were. By the same token, my father, before that, had gone into the automobile tire business in conjunction with his food. He had one part of the store made an tire business. And I recall that because the company he did business with, which was a big company, went bankrupt in the Depression. And so he had to switch to another tire company, which he did. And then because of the Depression, I guess they started the 50 cents a week routine. Well, he wanted no part of that, so he gave up that part of the business altogether. I guess again, which sort of gives you an idea of what was going on. But it is my recollection, and again, I could be wrong on this, Newport never achieved the high economic prosperity that other cities did, on the one hand. On the other hand, I don't think they had it as bad when the bottom fell out. So that while Newport suffered, like everybody, but I don't think we went to the two extremes that other communities did. After we had no big manufacturing plants, which would throw people out of work. We always had the army bases here. They were immune to economic trends. The torpedo station I don't know when it closed. That was located on where the hotel is now.
The Goat Island.
That gave employment to thousands of people, and I don't think that closed until a little bit later on. So I don't think we had the severe things, but we felt it. There's no two ways about it, but not to the extremes that other communities did. But it became hard for the small businessman to make a living. Because in our own particular situation, whereas the small grocer was the background of the food business in that era, starting in the 20s and 30s, the chain store came along. And that caused the closing of many small food stores, but not all. Anybody who was on the ball could compete successfully, and they did. Which lasted until after World War II, I guess, and then the supermarket era came along. And there the small store was at a distinct disadvantage. And I think the average food store died. So that today, I don't think you have any more than a half dozen small stores that are selling food primarily. But now the big ones are killing each other off. So it's a cycle that goes on and on.
Well, do you think that your family's standard of living was greatly affected during the Depression, or?
It was nip and tuck, I would say so. We always had food and clothes, though. There was always enough business to get along.
Yeah.
Didn't make any money, perhaps, but they made a living.
Now, some people look back on this era after it was over with some nostalgia, or you made do, and you.
That's right. I think it brought the best out of many people. Everybody had to pitch in. I think there were very few free rides in families. Everybody had to do their share, from the little ones up. This is the year when I've heard people say, in order to have enough fuel in the house, these kids used to go down to the railroad tracks when the coal trucks used to come in and pick up the coal that was laying around on the ground. Of course, I didn't see that personally, but I'm told this sort of thing went on. So that everybody did whatever they had to. Because we had the beaches, and there's always some way you could make a little money somehow, if you really wanted to.
So what would happen down at the beaches? There'd
Well,
be...
you could always go clamming and get part-time jobs, and they had a boardwalk then, and there were all kinds of stands. So some people could get some type of employment there.
Do you know anything about the Civic Employment Association in Newport that was supposed to have been helpful in getting people employment?
I hear them discussing that at the Newport Historical Society. I really don't know too much about that. I'm not familiar with that at all.
Do you think the Depression affected some neighborhoods a lot more than others?
Yes, well, you got to remember, I suppose, while it was a small community, I suppose the so-called Fifth Ward was the working man's ward. Also, you got to remember that many of these people in town had employment on the in Bellevue Avenue as gardeners, as butlers, as inside men. I remember seeing in my own research some of the big names in the city, and at that stage of the game, their fathers or whoever they were employed on Bellevue Avenue, and they had such titles as inside man, whatever that meant, and outside man.
Yeah.
So I suppose some were butlers and some chauffeurs or whatever. But they had neighborhoods were affected depending on what the situation was.
Yeah. Do you think the federal economic policies, I guess like the WPA, did that?
Oh yes.
Did that do much for Newport, or?
Well, all you've got to do is walk around today instead of holding that high. Look down at the sidewalks. There's many sidewalks still got the little brass or whatever it is plaque right on the grounds and very distinctly readable. You can see WPA written right across it.
Do you know of anyone who got employment through the?
Vaguely. I think then I knew people who did. The average fellow who came in, the greenhorns, who had no other source of employment, we did receive work. There's no two ways about it.
When do you think things turned around for Newport in terms of the Depression?
World War II time, I think.
So that was completely an outside influence.
I would think so. Bellevue Avenue hadn't been resurrected yet, but it was the Torpedo Station, the Navy base. Then it was called the training station, I believe. And many people were inducted and trained at the training station, and also at Fort Adams for the Army.
Did you think the end of Prohibition helped Newport during the Depression?
The end of Prohibition?
Yeah.
Somehow that don't make sense to me.
No,
I don't
I
see how
guess
the
it
end.
doesn't.
I don't think the end of anything. Could
Yeah, that's
have,
right, because the end was 1933, right?
So probably one of your immersion into the
Yeah.
other, so to speak.
Now, there were rumors apparently that the torpedo station was going to close down during this period. Are you aware of that at all?
Well, eventually it did close. So apparently the rumors were well founded.
Right.
And I think this was a source of problem. Again, from reading my own research, and you check the source of employment, and see many of these people were listed as helpers, training station, so forth. By the same token, you read the Newport City Directory, and you see a lot of strange names.
Mhm.
That is not local people. People were brought in for employment at the base and the torpedo station. So it was a major source of employment. There's no two ways about it. And it did bring many people in, as well as given employment to local people. And indeed, when it closed, this was another minor crisis in Newport.
What about the closing of the Fall River line in 1937? Was that? Do you remember that as a
No,
crisis?
I wasn't living in Newport. Well, I was away at school
Yeah.
by then. I was about to go. 37. That was my first year in college, and so I don't recall too much about the Fall River line.
Well, when it was in operation in its heyday, do you remember? Did you ever go on any of the boats?
Who had money?
That's a good answer.
No. It's that was a needed source of transportation. Who needed it? But I don't think the average person took joyrides or anything like that. I don't know. At least not to my recollection.
I understand that down at Long Wharf, there were many buildings and shops down there relating to the repair of the Fall River line
Could very
ships.
well. That's when they
Were
had-
you aware of these at all, or?
Not really, not on a shop-to-shop basis, but I do know the boats used to come in, and of course there was the line to New York also. They used
Right.
to leave from
Yeah.
there. So I was aware of these. I didn't participate on a personal basis on this.
So you really weren't affected yourself one way or the other by their presence, or
The absence
or
thereof.
the absence?
Not on a personal basis.
What about tourists that came in? Did these not get up to your neighborhood, or?
Well, see, we were away from the tourist area. However, Newport in the summer enjoyed a very fine climate, and there were the beaches and so forth. So Newport would have its steady summer visitors on a citywide basis, so that everybody in Newport suffered from the so-called Newport sickness. People invading Newport
Yeah.
to enjoy Newport, and they would visit. So Newport has always had plenty of company during the summer, which meant there were people coming in all the time. And this spread business around, because everybody had customers who had summer visitors. They would come in for their bottle of booze or whatever, and after a while you get to recognize some of these people year after year. They would come year after year. So this was a definite plus. Summertime, all of Newport benefited. Some areas more than areas, depending on the nature of your business. Honestly, as Bellevue Avenue began to make a comeback, those stores that came to that would get that much more of it. Or tourism, in whatever state it existed in those days, those stores that cater to that sort of thing would have your seasonal upswing. In our case, away from this all, we would have this other type of normal increase with the weather, with the influx of summer people and so forth. So it was spread around.
So when you say the people in your neighborhood and the influx, were these people visiting the families that
That's right.
that
Visiting
in your
families,
neighborhood?
Or people who would maybe rent an apartment
I
or
see.
a home in there, and even if they found a place a mile or two away, if somehow they blended into your place of business and were happy, they would always come back again.
Oh.
So you see, and we would see, as I say.
Now, some of these
again.
people who rented space in homes, would they have their a kitchen and so forth, so that they would.
Apparently.
Yeah.
Apparently. I would never inquire that.
Yeah.
Get too not personal with them. It wasn't our business. But it was a definite economic plus. There's no ways to it.
The pictures of First Beach or Newport Beach or whatever name you want to call it, and you mentioned the boardwalk. It looked like it was so elegant at one time. Did you spend any time down there?
Well, as a youngster, I don't know whether elegant is the word for it or not, but it certainly was a nice attraction and something that we all enjoyed, because there was in addition to the beach, you had a commercial pool on the other side. There were the bathhouses, there was the merry-go-round, there was a Ferris wheel, there was a convention center, there was private bathhouses as well as public bathhouses, and showers to go along with each. And all along the boardwalk there were all these various little stands selling not only food but the games of all kinds. The type of things that you would see in I suppose, a carnival.
Mm-hmm. Like Coney Island or Atlantic City, or?
Yes, that sort of thing. And there were band concerts down there, and I remember very distinctly hearing band concerts down there, and it was very nice. And of course, we'd always see the sailors come down, and they would show off with their calisthenics and have a gay time. It was very nice. Not only did you have Newport Beach, but the other end, where there's nothing except for a couple of restaurants.
Uh-huh.
That's what we called the Second Beach, but it was really Atlantic Beach, because there was another beach called Second Beach, which is still in existence.
That's where Johnny's Seafood House is.
Correct.
Okay.
That's right. That was a boardwalk there.
Oh.
And there were bathhouses. There was a second merry-go-round. The first wheel was right near there rather than near the other place. And it too had its stands all along the edge there. And you could do the same sort of thing that was down the other end. It was a separate entity,
Yeah.
much smaller, but very much the same sort of thing. So most people don't really recall that there were two merry-go-rounds and two sets of almost everything.
But it sounds like they're really. I mean, you had the summer people who came in, where the tourists. You had the Navy, and then you had all the different neighborhoods of Newport. It all sounds like, for a small geographic area, it's really chopped up, fragmented, right?
The only thing is via the school system, although each neighborhood had its own schools, came, I think in those days, the 8th grade, you went to the 1st through 7th grade in your neighborhood school. The 8th grade was down at Muppet School, I believe, which is now being converted into housing.
Right.
And I think there was something called industrial school, which was some compulsory thing, which was at John Clark School, which is on Mary Street, and is now the headquarters for the school department. But then there was a neighborhood school, plus the industrial school, where we would learn carpentry skills, how to plane and all that sort of thing. So through the media of this, you really knew people from all over the city. In my own particular case, being Jewish, we'd have the Hebrew school. So during the day you'd have your school kids, you'd have your neighborhood kids, and if you went to, in our case, the Hebrew school, but the Catholic kids had their own catechism classes. So in addition, you'd have your co-religionists that you could always And I found an old D-Malay record looking through for something. I was amazed at the amount of Jewish kids that were active.
Oh, yeah? What about the Navy presence? Were you very much, when you were in high school, for example, were you very much aware of the presence of the military?
Well, in our own particular case, I think, and again, I could be wrong in some of the details, but in our own particular neighborhood, we had many, many officers living, not too many sailors. And with every class that came in, we always had our share of Navy officers that used to patronize us, as well as the Navy base. And
now, this is prior to World War II you're talking about?
Prior to and after.
And after, okay. You know, in terms of chronology, if I think I'd like to back up a little bit and get into my favorite area, which is the hurricane of '38.
Well,
You mentioned that you happened, the first time I met you, you happened to be in town then because school hadn't started yet. And
The following week, I think school was to begin.
yeah. So if you could tell us exactly where you were when the hurricane hit and what you were doing and what happened to you during the storm.
Well, again, we're in the north end of the city, and we heard the stories and the rumors, which seemed to be close to unbelievable, and we began to see the trees swaying a lot,
Uh-huh.
and the stories began to infiltrate. The things were bad on the down around the water areas, and my favorite story that I like to tell is a contemporary of mine, a lady who became a school teacher afterwards. When she got up that morning, she, for some reason, looked at her barometer, and the barometer reading said hurricane coming, and she said, "Gosh, I got to get that thing fixed. That's crazy."
Uh-huh.
And sure enough, the thing was right. She wasn't crazy because there hadn't been a hurricane here for many, many years.
That's right.
The only one that I read about was the one of
1850?
1815.
Yeah,
I think
right.
it was. And then, contemporary-wise, they didn't refer to it as a hurricane, it was a storm. But from what I can gather, it must have been a hurricane because parts of the town were underwater. And Providence was badly hit, too.
So because you were in this part of Newport and away from the water, your awareness was of the wind and the rain?
That's right. And some of us did go down to the beach area.
Did you go?
I don't believe so. I was sort of on a standby basis in case something would happen. But I think what happened, we had a tidal wave then too, or an extremely high tide at the time, which washed out Newport Beach, destroyed the beach,
Right.
destroyed the boardwalk,
Right.
and the roller coaster. I did mention the roller coaster before. Destroyed the roller coaster, and indeed made the pond, which you can see from here if you're looking between the houses,
Mhm.
and the beach became one. In fact, I know one man who lost. Well, I know some people that were caught in that. I know some people who were killed.
Oh, really?
So, yes. We had one tragic case. His people had a concession, or the concession, at Third Beach.
Mm-hmm.
And he was in town, the young man. He had a radio station here at the time, and he felt he had to get back and get his people out of there.
You
He
mean
didn't-
his family?
Yeah, he didn't realize they had already gone to safety, and he lost his life
Oh, my
out
God.
there at the time. Because I don't know whether we had a tidal wave or an exceptionally high tide in connection with the strong winds, and it was powerful enough to wipe
Well,
everything out.
the time that the storm hit was about the same time as high tide, and it was also the autumnal equinox. So the tides were extra high anyway, and all of these things kind of
Because the
happened
combination
at the same time. And then also it was really kind of came by surprise. You know, people didn't think it was going to
That's right.
be as bad as it
We all read
was.
about hurricanes down south, but never happened up here. Because we didn't realize was going to be the first of a series of few that hit up this particular area.
Now, I understand that Newport was without power for several days.
I
There's-
don't recall for how long, but I know we were without power. I know parts of Newport were underwater, the One Wharf area, and boats were washed up on Broadway, and vice versa. Automobiles were in the ocean and so forth. There was some loss of life. I don't know how extensive it was. Tremendous amount of property damage. That's because nobody was prepared.
What about rioting?
I don't recall any rioting. I don't think so. That's subject to correction, but I have no recollection of rioting.
Now, the National Guard was called out to help and also to prevent some.
But I
some of that.
I don't recall anything because we really Our population overall was not was a pretty stable sort of population. Not only did we have the wealthy, we had our poor section, but these people are not bad people,
Mm-hmm.
and we didn't have a type of situation where racial tension ever existed. And I was brought up. All of us everybody had friends in all kinds of racial groups. Because when we say racial, it's using the word incorrectly. Race refers to color, but it has always been used to wrongly referring to religion. But whether you use it correctly or incorrectly, all of us had friends in all types of groups, including racial. Everybody had black friends, and white friends, and Catholic friends, and Protestant friends. So it was, well, of course, there's always some hatred, I suppose, but never on the scale that existed in many of the other areas. So it was a nice way of coming up in those days. Nobody ever locked their doors, and there weren't any problems, big problems. To my recollection, whenever an incident occurred, it was noteworthy to hear there was somebody who made racial slurs. This was noteworthy because it was an exception, at least from my own particular recollection.
Do you think the hurricane changed Newport permanently in any way?
Of itself, no. I think it made us more safety conscious, and now there's all kinds of regulation which you can put on the waterfront and which you can't put on the waterfront, because this is a never ending battle. But I don't think it had any overall or long-term thing. The Navy pullout by Nixon was far more devastating.
That's another subject. At some point, did you go down to see the damage on the waterfront?
I think everybody was cautioned not to go down there if you could avoid it, but everybody went down at least to take a quick peek.
Yeah.
Because we would go down Eustis Avenue here, or Gibbs, and look over what the road was completely washed out. Pure devastation.
Yeah.
But you could see it all from up on top, from the top of the hill.
So then a week later you went back to school?
Yes.
Yeah. Did it had any? I know Providence was downtown Providence was very badly hurt by the
That's right.
by the hurricane. Did anything happen at Brown, or were they
No.
high enough on the hill? Or
Brown was high enough up on the hill. And see, when the hurricane hit, it was freshman week at the time. So the freshmen were there, but the upperclassmen, I was a sophomore then. And the
so you missed it
upperclassmen-
by a year then.
That's right. That's right. And of course, it became the subject of campus jokes of the hurricane. Because
Any that you can repeat, or
yeah, one I thought was very. They used to have. I don't know what they call it, May Day or Spring Day, and each class or the class would put on a little skit of some kind involving the whole campus. And in that particular year, they had some of the class comedians, and we all knew this was going to happen, of course. They drove around the campus in some kind of a vehicle, and everybody was dressed up, all unshaven, with hair down the hair. And the big gag was that in the front of the campus, as you come up the hill, there's a tower, called Carey Tower.
Mm-hmm.
And the running gag then was that somebody had been blown up there during the hurricane, and they were just coming down, and they were making the rounds of the campus, and that's the basis of the gag that year. So that was kind of funny, but it ties in with the hurricane.
Yeah. Were there any other memorable stories that you had heard about the hurricane, either from Providence or in Newport?
No, well, Newport, seems to me I remember one or two friends who were caught down there at the time. They saved their lives.
When you say down, you mean down at
between Newport Beach and the Big Pond. and they walked home without any clothes on. They got caught in the wave and they were swept into the pond, but they were able to get away with their lives. I remember that was a story. And I remember a few years ago, I think just 4 or 5 years ago, there was a hurricane. We were urged to pack up and leave. And we sort of got ready. I don't know whether we had a dog then or not, but we got our cat ready in case a tidal wave came along.
This was in the middle of the storm then, or?
No, I don't think it ever hit one of those false scares. That was a storm, but it wasn't bad. As they say, if you look over in between here, I don't know, you can see the big pond. I don't know whether see over here. See the water?
Oh yeah.
That's the pond, and right over
I see
right
the
across,
little house there.
Yeah, right across on the other side is Newport Beach.
Right.
You see. So we were asked to leave, get ready to leave, just in case. But of this end, during the big hurricane, it was just the high winds and the rains, but no excessive water damage from the beach area. But I think the whole town was flooded with salt, if I remember right. I suppose one's experience depended on where one was at the time and how they were affected. Those down on the waterfront, Long Wharf and Thames Street, they were hit pretty bad. No warning, no protection, no way to cope with it. And I don't remember how much loss of life we had. There was some, but probably nowhere near as bad as it could have been.
Well, one of the reasons they say it wasn't as bad as it could have been is that, the tourists had pretty much gone.
This was September, right?
Yeah, right. So, well, that was something. Now we come. Oh, I'm sorry.
No, so go ahead.
World War II and the torpedo station. Were you in town at all during the build-up you were just here in the summertime, right?
No, I was drafted.
Right.
And I was away in service for 3.5 years. But I would come home on pass or on leave or whatever, so I would see it a little bit. Again, our shop was in the north end of the city, but it was affected by blackout. So none of the stores could have lights on in the window, and everything was dark. After all, we are a waterfront city, national defense. We had the bases here in Fort Adams. I don't know whether you're aware of it or not, but Narragansett Bay was surrounded by all kinds of forts.
Sure.
Must have been a dozen or so forts.
Right.
So this was a high priority military area. And so the blackout was in effect. And the stores, I suppose, all closed early, but when they opened, the lights were all out the window and everything was relatively dark. Of course, everything was on a wartime footing. Supplies were on a wartime footing.
And what about rationing?
Rationing was in full effect. I would come home, say on a 3-day fast, and I would go into the shop to see what was going on. And of course, I was at a complete loss. People were fooling with the stamps. You couldn't buy this or that without the stamps. And of course, I had no part of that. I didn't know what it was all about, and I didn't participate. So to look here or there. Of course, in the military, we didn't have any contact with that sort of thing. But like every other town, Newport was involved, along with the additional waterfront thing. I know during World War I, I know they made let's put it this way, during World War II, they made a big fuss over the fact that the Japanese were uprooted from California and put into camps by themselves. Well, in Newport, those of German extraction were not allowed on Thames Street.
Oh, really?
And indeed, I think people had to have passes to get into various areas down there. And I remember one of my research things, I found one of these passes where you could only get into these various restricted areas by means of this pass. But I'm told that those of German extraction were not allowed to go and sit in areas of Thames Street.
I hadn't heard that. Do you know if anyone in your family or community was involved in volunteer work with the Red Cross or the USO?
Oh, I think almost everybody was. And our own particular religious community, across from Tiro Synagogue, is the Jewish Community Center,
Mm-hmm.
which they had put in there, had moved there and converted into a center in 1927 and 1928. When the war came along, this building had several floors. On the main floor, there were classrooms, 2 little classrooms.
Right, yeah. Mm-hmm.
And those were converted during World War II by the Jewish Welfare Board, working with the USO, into USO quarters. All the desks were taken out,
Yeah.
chairs were put in there, desks were put in there, and servicemen of all religions and races could come in and sit and spend a little time. And I'm told they had dances there, either on that floor or on the main, or on the social hall downstairs. And the USO had workers here. The Jewish Welfare Board had workers here, just as they had during World War I. And being a Navy, a military base, you had this type of activity that I suppose certain other cities wouldn't have. But all these things went on here.
Do you think people felt safer living in Newport because of the concentration of military personnel and?
Well, commercial-wise, it was very good. Safety-wise, you didn't have the fear of the atom bomb, and I don't ever recall anybody ever worrying about being bombed or anything like that.
Wasn't
And I
there?
know we had all these various forts around here, and some had the big guns. And right around the corner here, I could take you up to there was a, I guess a searchlight base, and the bunkers, there's still a couple bunkers in existence here. They camouflaged now by trees, but they're still in existence. So the Newport was pretty well protected. In, I suppose, in the concept of what went on in those days. Today nobody would be safe. But for those days, I think we could actually say we were safe.
Do you think that your family's business did better because of the concentration of servicemen and their families?
Undoubtedly.
Because you mentioned that your neighborhood had Navy personnel that lived in it.
Oh, absolutely. I've got names. I've got a notebook here full of all four of the names. And up until last year, we still got Christmas cards from any of these people.
Oh, really?
In fact, until my father died 3 years ago, we used to get one from a man from World War I days.
Huh.
From Virginia, I believe. So we maintained a very good relationship with military personnel. And I say, in our own particular case, at that time, it was mostly officers. Some of the enlisted personnel.
Mm-hmm.
And very, very, very fine relationship. So there's no two ways about it that military business was enjoyed by everyone. It was better.
Do you know of anyone who left whatever their job was and went to work for the military because of higher pay or whatever?
I think so. I find that getting looking through the city directories that I see many names. I don't know whether they were the sons or who they were, but they all were at the base. Not at the base, at the torpedo station. So this was really a major source of employment. And indeed, when they closed, it was a major catastrophe, even more so than when the Navy pulled out, it seems to me, during Nixon's time. Really a major catastrophe.
At the end of World War II.
Yeah. I remember many people leaving this own neighborhood here because their source of employment was gone. And there was no reason for them to stay here anymore. And many of them left. I do mean many. So this was a major catastrophe that was felt all over. No two ways about it.
Is there anything else about World War II or the torpedo station that you feel is worth?
No, I was saying I haven't been in the service at the time. I could just tell you from what I used to see when I used to come back, and from what I knew about business in general, I would keep in contact. Because even when I went to school, and I would help them out at the store when I came back. So I sort of kept an eye on things, but the scope and the perspective would be limited, I suppose.
Yeah.
It may not be true of other people, who knows. But you see, you got to remember then that I know as far as the Jewish community was concerned, this was a generation of small businessmen, which is no longer true. It's primarily now a community of white-collar people, and not necessarily natives. But I guess this is part of your overall sociological change.
Sure.
Anyhow.
Well, we go from World War II to the Jazz Festival. And you
Yes,
mentioned the other day that you were in on some of the
early
preliminary
discussions,
talk about the Jazz Festival.
Not officially, but unofficially at other fairs when the talk was going on. And one lady suggested maybe I ought to look into supplying the refreshment sort of thing, but I wasn't set up for that, and I didn't follow through. And it was just probably an offhand suggestion. But we were hearing about the preliminary talk about having a jazz festival, which was a radical kind of thinking, initiated by the Laurelides, who were here in town at the time. And indeed they followed through, and the first jazz festival took place back in the 50s, I think.
1954.
At and the first affair was at the Newport Casino.
Right. And then the next few years they were in Freebody Park.
Freebody Park.
And I can't remember where Freebody Park is.
Memorial Boulevard. Does that mean anything?
Yeah, sure.
Right back on the.
Where Turo is that? No, the tower is that Mystery Tower.
No. That's over there. Oh, you're talking about the Yellowstone Mill?
Yeah.
No, that's Bellevue Avenue. But Memorial Boulevard does go into.
Oh, right. That's between Pelham and Mill. All right. So Freebody Park, is that?
Do you know where the
near the tennis court?
What's the army? The Christian Army, the Salvation Army. Do you know where the headquarters are? On
Memorial Boulevard, between Bellevue, on your way to
right
the
behind
beach.
there is Freebody Park.
Oh, okay. All right. And then it went to Connell Highway.
That's right.
Right. Did you go to any of the
yes.
programs?
I went to many of them, and along with my wife, and we would look forward to them. And they were quite well done, a new concept, because where else could you see dozens of outstanding jazz performers all in one night for a reasonable figure. And I would say that our generation was much better behaved than the next generation that came along. And I remember the first one was full with the overcrowding problems. I remember the program vividly, and it was very well done. Who's that jazz guitar player? Congdon, I think his name was. Eddie Congdon was there, and I think he sort of gave a little history of jazz. I think the climax was Stan Kenton at the end, if I remember right.
Well, in reading about the reading that I've done about it, which is fairly limited, but it sounded like in the beginning it was a fairly intellectual approach, and there were lectures and so forth.
Well, this went on for years, but this was a major part of that, a big part of it. And there were work sessions, and I went to some of them, and they were interesting. But the thing was, the budget was such that a few years later, they would have enough money to spend on one act, the same amount of it they had for the whole thing in the first few. Like years ago, they had the Benny Goodman Band with Benny Goodman.
Uh-huh.
Well, he commanded more money than the whole shoot match did in the first year or two. So that all your major attractions, this became the place to come to. Not in the first few years, you
Yeah.
know. I suppose they had to beg and borrow and do whatever they had to do to get these people to come. But as time went on, it became the place to come to, and they had the budget to be able to.
Now
do
there
this.
were times of unpleasantness during the jazz festival.
I think this was partly the fault of the jazz festival people. They oversold. The year of the riot,
Mm-hmm.
which I
But
remember.
weren't there several riots, or was
Well,
there?
the first big riot
Oh, okay.
on Freebury Park,
Okay.
they oversold. And most unfortunately, everybody they sold to all showed up. They weren't lucky enough to have that cheap flash show, but everybody showed.
Yeah.
And this already now includes some of your younger element, and there was a lot of beer drinking going on. And you see, in the first years, you didn't have this orgy type of thing going on.
So the people who came changed. Is that what you're
That's
saying?
right, yeah.
From your older crowd to your younger crowd?
We came primarily for the music. Not only primarily, but only for the music.
Mm-hmm.
As time went on, the people came here, especially, now you go into a young element, they came to drink, for the sex orgies, and for, in addition to the music. And the things that went on were unbelievable. Just stuff that I'm not going to repeat here from.
You mean things that you heard or saw, or
A little bit of
both?
both, mostly that we heard from authentic sources, because you'd hear the same type of thing over and over
so?
again.
You mean you had stopped going at that point because of change and?
That's right. Who needs any part of that? By this time, was old hat to a lot of us. And I would go down along with my wife to some of the other attractions that we would want to see, because you'd get your outstanding performers of the day: Duke Ellington, Count
Mhm.
Basie, Louis Armstrong, and you name it. Whoever, who's who in the jazz world came here, including some new people like Aretha Franklin, who are unheard of, relatively speaking. They got a boost here, and I think it may not be completely true, but you can almost say that Duke Ellington's resurgence in popularity stemmed from
Mm-hmm.
from here. I don't know whether you recall the incident of I think his name was Paul Gonzalez, his solo.
No.
Well, an average solo only lasts for a few bars. Well, this particular fellow got up and he got so wound up they last for 30 bars. And the Duke let him go on. And this became world famous, this
Oh.
performance, because he didn't repeat himself for 30-odd bars. I'm sure 30 was the right number. And by this time they were recording these things.
Okay.
And this performance became world famous in the jazz situation, and he enjoyed a remarkable resurgence in popularity stemming out of this. But all your jazz people did, and at this stage of the game, of course, Ween was brought in by Laura was to take things
Mhm.
over. And this stage again, the focus began to broaden. So not only did you have your traditional jazz, but you get your avant-garde jazz people and so forth, like Thelonious Monk and all these people, and Charlie Parker and all these guys. So you ran the gamut of the whole musical scale at this particular time.
Well, most years did you attend?
I wouldn't say most, but a good many of them
Mhm.
we did. A good many of them we did. And they were really enjoyable.
And during the riots, was your area affected at all? Because I understand there was a lot of damage done.
Well, at our own shop up here, we enjoyed a lot of business, oddly enough, from these young people. But they were not rowdy when they came to our place. In fact, I think the biggest single day business we did at that time.
Were you selling liquor at that time?
Yeah,
Which part of the business did you enjoy
the beer.
the beer?
Yeah. But these people were not rowdy here. I don't know how they behaved elsewhere.
Was your store logically on the way to the festival? or-
Apparently, coming, depending on the way they came in, if they
Yeah.
came in through this way here, St. Mountain was routed down Gibbs Avenue.
Uh-huh, okay.
And if you look the right way, you see our shop. And apparently, those who came to us enjoyed our way to do business more than those that were nearer there, and they would come back to us, and they would come back over and over again. And there were no long lines, like you had to stand in front of some liquor stores, you had to stand in line to get in.
Huh.
And they would only allow X amount of people going at a time. We didn't enjoy that type of business. But I remember distinctly the year of the riot that we had these young fellows coming in, and they were well behaved. How they were an hour or two later, I don't know. But that sort of gave the whole justice a different flavor, and that it didn't do it any good. My generation was primarily interested in the music. Because you got to remember, my generation was the swing era generation, and I was completely immersed in that. And so all this really was meaningful to us. It was a musical happening, not necessarily a orgy, beer blast type of thing.
Do you think the last festival was in 1971? Do you think it should have been continued?
For both the city and the jazz festival people. Nobody took the long view of things, and those who didn't make their voices heard loudly enough. So if the jazz festival people and the city are getting together and they each had said, look, let's each put in X amount of money for X amount of years. Let's build up a big fund. Let us then go out and build the proper grounds, the proper buildings.
With the proper facilities.
With the proper facilities, which could have been easily done, but the city was just apparently interested in the taxes and whatever fees they could get, and the jazz people were just interested in the situation right then and there. And there wasn't enough. Some people blame one, some blame the other, but it was a mutual thing. And even today, the big thing that isn't being done, that should be being done, people wonder how to extend the summer season in Newport. Well, to my mind, there's only one logical way. Now that people have mixed gambling, the only thing should be is music and the arts. But to do that, you should have the proper type of facilities, certainly more so than...
So overall, something like the Jazz Festival is good for Newport if it's handled properly.
Oh, absolutely. And worldwide, what did Newport become famous for? Not Bellevue Avenue, not for the torpedo station. No, it was famous for the Jazz Festival. Worldwide. And people, after all, they had press here from all over the world. And nobody ever heard of Providence, Rhode Island. And it was Newport. It was the Jazz Festival. And I don't believe I'm exaggerating here.
What about,
and it deserves it. They really did nice things at the time, musically speaking.
what about the way the disturbances were handled by the city? Was there, could this have been done differently, or do you think people were just sort of caught by surprise?
Well, I'm going to tell a story that probably isn't too well known by many people.
Oh, that's what we want.
But I think he was a state trooper from another city, and I don't remember what state. I think it was a different state. And he was sent here to study the way the Newport police handled mob control. It was considered apparently a good subject to study. Apparently they did things well enough to have people come here to see how it was done. Now, this is something that I remember very distinctly, and it was standing right near my store, because apparently he was visiting up this area, or I had come by for whatever reason, and he told me this. Now, I think, and I wouldn't swear to this, I think he was from Connecticut. And they thought that mob control was done very well here. I suppose there were isolated instances when things weren't done right, but I think overall they did well. When you reflect the thousands of people who came here, and of course in our later stages when the emphasis mistakenly was switched from jazz to folk and that sort of thing, and it attracted this newer generation. This me generation who didn't have the respect, just here for a blast.
Yeah.
And these people became completely inhibited. And of course, these are the ones that caused the last affair at the festival field. And whether it was handled correctly, it's hard to say. I think overall, when you reflect that we have a small piece of land, I think overall they did very, very well. You remember, Newport is Newport. Small, narrow streets are small, narrow streets.
In 1969, the new bridge opened, and the ferry stopped running. Did you take that ferry between Newport and Jamestown very often?
Did I take it? Yes. Did I do it very often? No.
Uh-huh.
During World War II, I would take it a lot because I found myself stationed for a while in Point Judith, which is in the other side of the bay. And the only way you could get here was, if you didn't go through Providence, was via the ferry. And of course, that was the traditional Newport trauma, racing to get that ferry. And many times you'd break all kinds of laws to get there, and the ferry would just be pulling away just as you drove up, and then you'd have to wait an hour for the next ferry. And as many times that you'd be there, and the cars would be back up for a mile. And quite often again, you'd have to wait for the next ferry.
Did you ever take it as a foot passenger, or what?
As a soldier, but not as a civilian.
Yeah.
As a soldier. But in those days, hitchhiking was much more popular.
Yeah.
It was safer, and everybody would pick up a soldier. And indeed, I found myself in a couple of ports where there was no means of transportation except for the phone. And once you get in the air here, somebody would always pick you up and take you over.
So before you were in the service, you took the ferry boat a lot less, or
a lot less, once in a while. But after all, why would we have to do that? There wasn't that much attraction in Jamestown, and if you wanted to go to Providence, there was the overland route.
Right. Were you aware of problems with the ferry system, other than the maybe it didn't run off enough if you just missed it, or the backup of the traffic?
No, it was just one of those things you took in stride. This was the way of life if you wanted to go it that way.
Yeah, that system was owned by Jamestown, the town of Jamestown, which was very unusual because it was a major link in the state transportation system, but it wasn't owned by the state, and Newport didn't really contribute. Do you think there was much resentment towards the town of Jamestown in terms of the way?
From the perspective, I don't recall anything along that. It may have been there, but
it wasn't a part of your daily life, really.
No.
What about the bridge? How did you feel about the fact that the bridge was going to...
Everybody was tickled pink about that. It was, after all, if you wanted to go to New York, and everybody always, sooner or later would go to New York, this would save well over an hour.
Uh-huh.
I remember in the old days, before this sort of thing, to go to New York was a 5 or 6 hour proposition. Especially with the road system not being quite as up to date as it is now. Actually, it was a 5 or 6 proposition. Now it's 3 hours. To go to Providence was an hour and a half in those days.
You mean before the Mount Hope Bridge opened?
To go to Boston was 3 hours.
Yeah.
So these bridges all
So they changed Newport in what way?
I think excess would be the word.
Uh-huh.
Because there's some grumbling.
You mean in terms of both the people getting out and then the people coming in also?
Because the main gripe that you hear about that sort of thing, before Newport began its tourism comeback, was that the bridge only made things easier for people out of town to get to the Cape.
Uh-huh.
And there's a certain amount of resentment. Though I suppose that'd be a natural resentment, but that wasn't the way of things, the natural way of things. But overall, definitely there was a need for it. And definitely there's a need for the newer bridge.
What about the toll? Was there resentment about the amount of the
Well, it was a certain
fee?
amount, but again, You didn't have to take it if you didn't want to. You could always go way around Providence if you wanted to. But in those days, those people didn't want to spend the dime to go over Mount Home Bridge to save the dime.
Yeah.
Remember, you're talking about, in those days, the Depression days. And if you had a choice of going around through Fall River
Yeah.
to save the dime, you would. And gas, apparently, the cost of gas wasn't a factor. 5 gallons for $1, 6 gallons for $1. You see, so that extra little bit didn't amount to much. But the time was brutal if you went through Fall River or Providence. There was always one hang-up going through Fall River and one in East Providence, where you could kill a half hour just in one little spot in each place. But the bridges were always welcome, and the fees were never considered really exorbitant.
Okay, now we're up to 1973 when the when the Navy picked up and went away, or that's people's perception of it. Do you think this was overall a loss or a gain for Newport?
Oh, no two questions about it, it was a gain. Wasn't perceived to be as such at the time. Panic set in initially. In our own particular case of this end of the town, it didn't mean that much to us directly.
Yeah.
But for those businesses who depended on the Navy, and let's face it, Thames Street and Long Wharf and parts of Broadway depended largely on the Navy, as well as landlords all over the city. All had Navy personnel, sailors and officers all over the island. So everybody was affected one way or another, some more so than others, some very much more so. And you couldn't blame them for sitting in panic. Here's where the perspicacity, foresight of certain individuals came in right at the right moment, and they saw the potential here. And of course, the what you did mention someplace along the line was the redoing of Thames Street.
Yeah, that's under the restoration. Yeah, that's the next section after this.
You see, and all this sort of ties in together. So this points out the fallacy and the foolishness and the stupidity of any community depending solely on one source of income. And those who've gone overboard on the tourism will make the same mistake if that's what they're going to primarily depend on.
So you think that the one way the city changed was when it in the redevelopment and restoration, and then also in the direction towards tourism? Or is that?
Well, for my mind, the most important thing we've done here, and most people don't look at it, is the industrial park. To me, this
On
is
Valley Road?
That's right. The more of this sort of thing we get, the better. Because this is year-round.
Yeah. Do you think that that's related to the Navy pullout at all?
Well, a lot of these businesses are Navy-oriented.
Oh,
But
okay.
see, the Navy, when people speak of the Navy pullout, they're only looking at one phase. There was never 100% Navy pullout.
Right.
It was just the destroyer sort of thing. But the educational base never left. And indeed, what has happened was that part of the Navy not only stayed, but they expanded.
Yeah.
And that's took over from where the torpedo station left off many years ago. And because of this sort of thing here, then you have Raython coming in, and you have the industrial park developing, and some more industrial things coming in. And these are very important. To my mind, they are more important in a way than tourism, because this brings in year-round wages. This keeps younger people here. These keep the families here. And this generates income 52 weeks of the year, whereas the tourism is more limited. And right now, if you go down Thames Street, you can get sick from the amount of empty stores. And I also noticed that the new stores being built aren't being rented that quickly. So that perhaps this initial success of the tourism may be being overdone in many ways, and this phase of Newport isn't over. In fact, society in general never is static. There's always change going on.
Mhm.
It's just that we don't perceive it when
You mean you mean the tourism part going as far as it's going to go is
Well, it's still going on, but nobody
Right.
knows exactly
when
how
it's
high it's
going to
gonna
peak?
last.
Or
and will extend beyond Thames Street. Right now, let's face it, the only areas that have benefited from this tourism is Thames Street and Bellevue Avenue a little bit. It hasn't hit Spring Street. It hasn't hit Broadway. And again, Thames Street is just a summer sort of thing. That's why I mentioned before, I think some means have got to be found sooner or later to extend the season. To see all these empty stores down there now, it's really pathetic. I do a lot of walking, and I'm just sick when I see this sort of thing. We've got to do something about it. And a lot of people thought that gambling would be the answer. Well, gambling has its good parts, and it has its bad parts. In Newport, we concentrated on the bad parts. Perhaps they're right. But nobody's come up with the substitute.
well, when in '73 when there was this panic, was your neighborhood affected, or was your store affected?
Only to the extent where it removed the officers and the sailors who did the renting. There were that fewer people in the city, and that meant that less activity. And you got to remember, you hear people mention the generation of dollars. Well, unless I'm greatly mistaken, if I remember right from my economics, I think this was called the velocity of money. And I think money turns over 7 times. So if somebody spends $1, it gets turned over 7 times, so it becomes $7. Now, when you remove all these officers and all these assorted military personnel, which is spread citywide, this is not television, I don't want to use my hands here, the economic impact is citywide. But again, there are those who catered more than others. And of course the bars were devastated. I'm sure you've heard of one area down there called Blood Alley. I think there were, sort of exaggeration of course, but there were 10,000 bars in one block, you know.
What was a typical Friday or Saturday night like on Thames Street when the fleet was in?
Hectic. Nothing but blue uniforms. And this is the way these people made their livelihood. And of course, generated all types of activity. I don't think I have to go into details on this. They claim gambling brings this sort of activity, which maybe it does. But with so many bars, and they all made a living down there. And this is the sort of thing we'd rather not see happen again. Though, of course, now with the overdevelopment down on Thames Street, you see a different kind of overdevelopment. Because you have restaurants on top of restaurants. Now, I suppose Newport has more good restaurants than almost any other city its size in the country. Probably more than some bigger cities, too. But can they exist on a year-round basis?
Do you think the city is affected much by Navy people retiring here?
Yes. There's no two ways about it. The impression that I get from talking to military personnel, and to those who talk to others who talk to these people, Newport appears to be had always been considered a much more desirable area than other military ports. Given a choice,
be stationed in,
given a choice, so many of these people would much prefer Newport. And when they retire to Newport. And many of them have. But again, when you talk about retired people, you're still referring to a class of people who have a limited amount of income. And with the overdevelopment going on, what's going on in Newport is unreal.
Where do you think these people settle when they retire here?
Well, those who came here before the boom could buy houses and rent apartments relatively reasonable. Apartment that used to go for $100 or less just a few years ago are now $400 and $450. Now, where does the person of low income go? It becomes a problem. And this is a phase that we're going through now, and nobody knows where it's going to end yet. and redevelopment hasn't ended yet. Now they're talking about more hotels on Thames Street. I had a friend of mine, talking about personal contact, boyhood friend of mine, went to Worcester, Provincetown, Worcester, and then to Florida. Came to see me a few years ago, visit me. He says, I want your advice about something. He says, come with me. And we took a ride down to Thames Street, and he went down to the gas company's property now.
The Provident Gas Company
right,
at
which is
Wellington Street?
That's right, which
Yeah.
is nice. He says, I got a chance to buy this now. He says, you think I ought to?
I can hardly wait for the answer.
So I said, look, if you're looking for a quick turnover, buy it today and sell it tomorrow. I said, don't do it. If you want to buy it and hold on to it for a few years, this is the common section of Thames Street to be redeveloped. I said, you'll make out very well. It's up to you to make the decision. Well, he was looking for a fast turnover, so he didn't do it. But you see, if he had bought it and held on,
Sure.
I think, for some reason, the number 500,000 sticks out in my mind. I don't know whether this is right or not. At that time.
At that time?
At that time. It's a lot more now.
Oh, sure.
But I think, I say it could be imagination, but it's some such figure. So in just a few years you can see what has happened.
Yeah.
And you should ride around down. Have you seen Coddington Wharf? With the little
Yes,
condominiums down there?
yeah. We were walking around down there not too long ago. Yeah.
And this I love to see. I know that a lot of people say it's been overdone, and possibly I guess I've been.
Well, in terms, this sort of leads right into restoration and redevelopment. When were you first aware that the city was sort of falling apart in different areas?
Well, I wouldn't say falling apart. I was sort of a hiatus, I guess. Emerging from the 30s and 40s, we were aware of the fact that Bellevue Avenue was loaded with white elephants. That's what they were called. Because nobody could afford to keep these up. Now, I know of many of these places you could buy for a song. In fact,
They did.
But 2 weeks ago, a friend of mine, who's an engineer, lives not too far from here, we were riding on, for whatever reason, on Bellevue Avenue, and we passed by one of the mansions. He says, I could have bought that place. I think it was around $20,000, 30 something like
And
that. He says, that was no problem. He said, what was I going to do with it when I get it? And the amount of renovations that would call for, and the amount of taxes made it prohibitive. And I think the story could be repeated over and over again. And I think one of the mansions on the other side that's rented out a lot, I can't think of the name of it now, one of the nicer ones that's available commercially to anybody.
You mean like Rosecliff? Where they have,
That's the one, Rosecliff.
Okay.
I think that was sold for $20,000. Now today you couldn't buy two stones from the thing for $20,000.
That's right.
And this isn't that far, we're not talking about ancient history. This is just a relatively few short years ago.
Were you aware at all of the historic value or the quality of so many of the buildings here? Not just the mansions, but also the colonial
I've
homes?
always been interested in history, but because it was so close to me, I never looked into it that much in those days. I'm much more aware of it now than I was then. Especially now that I conduct my own personal walking tours.
Yeah.
I see, since I've been retired 3 years ago, I've seen mansions that I never saw before. Mansions that I've driven by hundreds of times, but I never saw them. But when you walk by, you see them.
Yeah.
Case in point, Bois Doré, I think on Webster Street. I go by and I gawk at it. Oh my God, how many times I've been there and I never noticed it before. And we must have in Newport a couple hundred mansions. All right. What do you hear about? A half a dozen of them.
Yeah, right.
But they're all around. A lot of them being switched to condominiums and so forth.
What about the more modest homes, but are important historically? The colonial homes. In fact, you were involved in one yourself in terms of having looked into its history and background.
Yeah, some other time I'll show you. I have the genealogy of the house in my files in the other room. A friend of mine, all right, a lawyer, was telling me just a couple of weeks ago, Division Street, which is across from Turo Synagogue,
right?
Historic Hill area.
Yes.
He had inherited some homes from his father, junk heaps. He sold one, was either $1,000 or $2,000. It resold not too long ago for over $100,000. Now, does that tell you anything?
Yeah, it does.
And see, this is here. Darstook did a lot for us, and this saving many of these homes from virtual extinction. And you remember, Newport's got more colonial homes
That's
than
right.
any other city in the country.
That's right.
And this is very, very important.
But now, the area you lived in had been newly developed.
Well,
Yeah, so your area wasn't as historic or didn't have as many of
That's right.
these homes that were being
you got to
restored.
remember, original Newport is the Point, West
Right.
Broadway, the Point area,
Right.
Thames Street, Spring Street, Historic Hill,
Mm-hmm.
and perhaps Bellevue Avenue, up to approximately where Memorial Boulevard
Yeah.
would now be. The other area down there were all farms, as indeed a lot of the streets around
Mhm.
off of Bellevue Avenue, up this end of the city were all farms.
Mm.
And if you read through the deeds, you'll hear them referred to, or see them referred to as farms. And it's quite fascinating to see what has happened to these particular things. And these developments are all for the good. And all the time now, you'll see homes being sold now, the mansions. I
That's
think
right.
one was just sold a couple of weeks ago.
Mm-hmm.
Now here's another development, the house that just burnt on
Right.
Bellevue Avenue. The owners are not going to neglect that or tear it down. They're going to rebuild it.
Three
I think
families are gonna
Yeah.
divide it into three sections.
10 years ago, 20 years ago, I don't think anybody would have bothered. It'd have been just another
Yeah.
lot.
Well, do you feel there's a real civic pride in Newport in terms of its
Well, Newport
history
is the
and-
place to come back. It's a place now to be. You got to remember, Newport always was outstanding. Newport was always known for its climate and its waters and its bay. And even after the Revolution destroyed Newport and the War of 1812 and the storm that we refer to as
Yeah,
1815 finished devastating Newport, Newport was never 100% knocked out. It didn't destroy the climate or the bay and that sort of thing. Newport was always an attraction. And indeed, if you look at the records, people from other parts can always summit here. And of course, this is what led to the so-called Gilded area,
Right,
that
right.
development that we referred to before, when all these farmlands were broken up. And indeed, if you go on these tours, it seems to me the fellow who owned one of the first mansions, Chateau Saumur, owned all the land between that, his place, and the Breakers.
Well, that was Wetmore, the Wetmore family.
Well, it was before the Wetmores.
Oh,
The fellow
okay.
who owned that. I don't know whether he was Jones or Jones was across the street. But the first fellow who owned it owned all that land. Can you imagine? Just land itself
Yeah.
would be millions and millions of dollars.
Yeah, that's right. Huh.
So that I suspect, they say it's a story, but I wouldn't be a bit surprised of the way Bellevue Avenue probably got its name. I can just picture a Frenchman or an admiral
Yeah.
standing up there on Bellevue Avenue, maybe standing in the first mansion, the
Kingscote.
Kingscote,
Right.
looking over. Remember, from Kingscote, you could see the water.
That's right.
I could just hear him say, "Mon Dieu, Bellevue, Bellevue, what a view!" Yeah. And that's probably where Bellevue got its name from. Of course, you may be well aware of the fact that the first part of Bellevue, between Toro Street and, again, where Memorial Boulevard was in those days, was called Jew Street.
Oh, no, I didn't know that.
Probably because of the
Of
fact
that
that
cemetery
the Jewish
that's there?
probably.
Yeah.
Probably.
Well, another era of Newport looks like it's come to an end recently with the America's Cup, at least for the time being. Do you remember 1930 when it was held here in Newport for the first
I
time?
remember the name Sir Thomas Lipton
Uh-huh.
being bandied about, because everybody knew about Lipton tea. And it was kind of odd that there was actually a living person by that name
Yeah.
who would come here and sell. Never get anywhere with it, but he would come year after
Yeah.
year. And this is something that we look forward to, never to the degree that it has developed into, never the commercial aspects that it has developed into. And I don't think Newport is going to be knocked out by the Cup leaving. I think they should be able to find other activities. And I can't see the cup staying away indefinitely. The way it stayed here all these years, I think I'll come back.
And you think it'll come back to Newport?
But again, I hope they don't get too greedy. The way there was some talk before, making things economically impossible for some of these people to stay.
Were there any of the Cup series that you remember in particular?
No, I'm not though I'm a Newporter, I don't care for boating. I'm a landlubber. And I would just keep a half an eye on things, but I never felt personally involved.
How do you feel about living in a place like this that has an event like the Cup race, or had up until now?
Like so many native Newports, I would avoid downtown like a plague.
Okay.
However, unlike some people who resent it and begrudge it, I don't begrudge the people down there anything. I say let them have their tourist season, let the tourists come in and enjoy it. I'll go down in springtime, I'll go down in fall, and I'll enjoy whatever I have to enjoy then.
Did you want to get that?
I don't know whether my rifle's here or not. I don't begrudge these people anything.
What do you think the main contribution to Newport was of having the Cup races here?
It picked up the slack after the Jazz Festival left. And of course we have the other music festivals here now, which I think help round out Newport's cultural picture. But I would love to see something more developed on a year-round basis. And the potential is here. I think before all the land goes, I think facilities ought to be built someplace. Rather than this fragmented approach, you know. However, that's another story altogether. But all these things are important. But I don't want to see Newport depend on any one thing anymore. This is bad. Because you see what happens when, if you depend on one thing and sometimes on that one thing, it's devastating. And there's no need for it. I think this industrial move is one of the best things we've ever had.
Is there much land left up in there to do more? We've never really driven around back in there. We've just seen it from Valley Road.
Yeah, it's a different world altogether. And of course now they're talking about expanding up to the West Main Road, another industrial park. And I think this ought to be encouraged, absolutely. This keeps young people here, it creates wealth, it creates wages, and